Good morning, everyone. We'll start with the health and safety announcement. There's no fire alarm anticipated today, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit by following the running man signs above the doors and make your way to the rear of the car park. The organizer of the meeting will tell you when it's safe to return. Tickets are available, sorry, toilets, but tickets. I've gone into musician mode. Toilets are available in the stairwell of the building at each floor landing. Water is available from the water cooler in reception. And finally, please make sure all phones are either muted or switched off. Good morning. I am the Chair, Councillor Ollie Davey, and welcome to this Planning Committee meeting on Tuesday, the 22nd of April 2025. And sitting to my right is the Vice Chair, Councillor Matt Hall. Supporting officers today are Wendy Ormsby, Development Manager, Damien Hunter, Planning Solicitor, and Wendy Harris, Democratic Services Officer. And the presenting officers for today's applications will be Jeremy Ebden, Wendy Ormsby and Andrew Rigby. The meeting today is being streamed live to the Council's YouTube account, so can I remind all members and officers contributing to the meeting to use a microphone or your comments will not be heard. We'll now start by doing a roll call of committee members and declarations of interest. Well, we've done that already, Wendy, haven't we?
I'd like to, for members, just to say their declarations, because if we just do the name, the camera doesn't pick up everybody as they speak. So if they do the declarations as well, even if they say, you know, no declarations, because I know you're going to do the blanket lobbying one. So,
okay.
So that's
so
okay.
Yes, in that case, yeah.
Yep, so I'll start, Chair.
Yeah.
So if I start with yourself, Councillor Davey.
Yeah, I am present, just about, and I will declare on behalf of the whole committee that we've been subject to lobbying on this first application, 240096 MFUL, by both developers and the objectors.
Thank you. Councillor Matt Hall, Vice Chair.
Present.
Councillor Brian Bailey.
Present, Wendy, and I'd like to give apologies for Maddie Chapman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barlow.
Present and no further declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Bloxham.
Present and no further declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Colin Brown.
Present and no further declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Jenny Brown.
Present, no further declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Faithful.
Present, no further declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzard.
Present and no further declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Haggerty.
Present and no further declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Anne Hall.
Present and no other declarations. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Eileen Ragg.
Present, no more declaration.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So the speakers for today's planning applications can be found on page 4 of the agenda, but in respect of 241045, full minor new bridges, which is on page 181 to 218 of the agenda, we have had someone come to speak in favour of that application. The agent, is it, Wendy?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, although he hadn't registered to speak in advance, we have decided to allow him to speak. So that will also should be added to the list. So we'll move on to agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meetings, pages 5 to 8. Is it members' wish that I, as chair, sign the minutes of the meetings held on, or the meeting held on 22nd of April 2025 as a true and accurate record? Can I ask those in favour to raise their hands, please? And those against? Any abstentions? No, that's unanimous. Okay, apologies, Wendy.
Yes, we've got several apologies. Councillor Simon Smith, Councillor Mike Howe, Councillor Sarah Chamberlain and Councillor Maddie Chapman.
Declarations of interest we've done. Matters of urgency, there are none. Agenda item 6, to agree any items to be dealt with after the public have been excluded. There are none of those. We move on to agenda item 7, planning appeal statistics, pages 9 to 23 on your agenda. And we have an update from Mrs. Ormsby, the development manager.
Good morning. So looking through the appeals report, I think the decisions of note, really just a bit of clarity on the first one in the decided list, so 240980 PDQ. So this is for the change of use of an agricultural building to 3 dwelling houses under Class Q of the General Permitted Development Order. And this appeal was allowed by the inspector, who concluded that the council had taken longer than the statutory period to make their decision, and as such deemed consent was effectively granted. However, in its deliberations, the council had determined that they didn't consider that the proposals actually met the requirements to be permitted development under Class Q. And the inspector acknowledged that that wasn't a matter for his consideration, but it was necessary for the development to meet that criteria to be able to proceed lawfully. So notwithstanding the fact that the appeal itself was allowed, the officer view is that the works are not actually permitted development, so cannot proceed lawfully. And the applicants officers have recently contacted the applicants to make them aware of that fact. Basically, the works go beyond what is allowed as permitted development. Looking through the other ones, 240043 PIP, which was permission in principle for 9 dwellings at Woodbury. We've had obviously quite a few big schemes come forward at Woodbury recently, which we have resolved to approve. This appeal was dismissed on the basis that the site itself was not well related to the facilities in Woodbury. There would be reliance on the use of the car because of lack of good footpaths, etc. And those were the principal reasons for that application being refused. And then the last one on the decided list there, 240385 VAR. That was a hearing which was attended by our officers. That appeal was dismissed on the basis that the applicant had not demonstrated sufficient justification to remove that agricultural workers' tie. The inspector taking the view that the building hadn't been marketed at a reasonable price, etc., to demonstrate that there was nobody likely to want to take up that unit with that restrictive clause added to it. So that was the only comments I had to make on that, unless there are any questions. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, we'll move on to the planning appeals status report, which is page 24 in your agenda pack. And again, that's from Mrs. Ormsby.
So I think would ask that the report is noted. I think it is relatively clear in what it is setting out, which is effectively the rate of appeals allowed and dismissed compared nationally and compared with how we've performed in previous years. The conclusions are that we are effectively our outcomes are around the national average, not raising any particular areas for concern in terms of the extent of appeals being allowed. It sets out for members' information the different types of appeals, those which were committee decisions, those which were committee decisions contrary to officer recommendation. So you can see how we've performed there. And also included, which was a request by Councillor Barlow at a previous committee meeting, was information about costs that have been incurred with relation to planning appeals. We actually had no planning inquiries during the last financial year. So our costs are, which paragraph 3.9 sets out at just under £14,500, relatively low compared to how we might have been in previous years where we have had planning inquiries. Obviously, once we're instructing barristers, etc., then the fees do tend to go up quite a lot more. So yes, unless there are any questions, the recommendation is that the report is noted. Thank you.
Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Just the costs that we were awarded, was that a large amount of money? I think you said there was one that we got costs against. Was it partial costs on that one? And also, when you've got the appeals dismissed, I know on the appeals allowed, you put on their committee decisions contrary to officer recommendation. Are there any appeals dismissed? Sorry, appeals allowed, you've got that, but there's nothing in the appeals dismissed. Is there any appeals dismissed that were against committee decisions contrary to officer recommendations? Sorry, that's on page 27 of my pack, 2.17. And sorry, and 2.15, the appeals dismissed.
Reading the report, I would interpret it that there were no appeals dismissed which were contrary to officer recommendation. That's how I interpret that. And on the point of the costs for the enforcement appeal, I don't actually have that specific individual cost, but I can find that out for you and report that back. I did think that I hadn't actually seen it. I don't think they've actually submitted their costs to us. Ah, okay.
Yeah, it states in paragraph 3.8 that an inspector did award costs, but they've not been submitted yet to the council. So we don't actually know what costs may or may not be claimed.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we move on to agenda item 9. As you will recall, there was some confusion about the vote and my use of the casting vote on an application back in February. So I'm going to ask our Director of Governance, Melanie Wellman, to present the report for that one.
Thank you very much, Chair and members. Yes, this report basically highlights the process that was followed in relation to the application relating to land adjacent to Harepath Road. Apologise, I have got a bit of a frog in the throat, so apologies if I start coughing. So as members will recall, this application was considered on the 25th of February, and after much debate, it finally culminated in a proposal to approve the application subject to a section 106 and conditions and additional conditions. 6 members voted in favour of the proposals, while 6 members voted against it, including the chair. So it then led to a chair's casting vote. Initially, the chair indicated that he was minded to recommend refusal, but having received advice from the planning manager, upon the reasons that he'd set out for that refusal, he basically formed the view that he was going to accept the officer's recommendation. Since that meeting, we've had concerns raised regarding the legality of the decision making, both in terms of the advice given and the decision. In terms of the planning officer's advice, what is clear is that, you know, it is the role of the planning officer to set out their professional view when there is a recommendation being put to, you know, refuse or allow a planning permission. So, having looked at those concerns, we are absolutely concerned that officers acted entirely in accordance with the law and that there was no distinct or material defect in the advice that was given. In terms of the actual the vote, whilst we consider it to have been lawfully conducted, we absolutely appreciate that there was confusion for some onlookers regarding the vote that was taken. And so for that very reason, we decided to bring it back to this committee to confirm that casting vote, because we think it's very important that we didn't make that sort of view behind closed doors, that we do that openly and transparently as a council, that, you know, that we always choose to do. So really, it's just about making sure that we're open and transparent and that we're clear that there is no uncertainty about the decision that has been reached. So this report is simply inviting the chair to confirm the exercise of his casting vote. And really, that's the main purpose of it, so that the public and the developer are absolutely abundantly clear as to the decision that has been reached.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wellman. Do I need to ask advice here? Do we take speakers at this point, or?
Don't know whether it's a speaker or question or.
It's a question. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you very much for your report. The question comes that I think there were a number of us that were at that planning meeting, which were, shall we say, just slightly confused about the due process. And although, as I say, thank you very much for the report, I don't think it ultimately clarifies the due process. So I think it would be handy today, as this report is before us, to actually totally clarify the due process. I have read our constitution, I've gone through our terms of reference, I can't see anything specific, and I have contacted numerous colleagues within the profession. So if I explain what I understand as the process, if I'm right, just please tell me. If I'm wrong, please tell me on where that is written down. So obviously we had a presentation to us where there was a thorough discussion about many aspects of the application, including potentials for additional conditions. At that point, Councillor Barlow then proposed acceptance as per the officer's recommendations. It was seconded and it was voted on, and as you've already explained, it was 6-all, and the casting vote went to the chair. Now, my understanding is if the chair had voted to accept it, that would have been the end of the conversation, because in essence, the due process had already been through. On the day, the chairman voted against. So in essence, that motion failed. Therefore, a new motion should have come back to allow the rest of the committee to then discuss issues and options that related to a possible refusal. Obviously, I've seen a number of you shake your heads to this, but this is the process that I understand from numerous other local planning authorities. So I understand there are always variations, shall we say, in how councils approach things, but if I'm wrong, fine. Is it written down? Where is it written down? If it's not written down, then this needs to be written down, because this incident does not do this council any favours in the view of the public. Thank you.
So in terms of where it's written down, we don't have any planning sort of procedure rules in place. So absolutely, I agree with you. That's been recognised as one thing that we will want to develop over a period of time. Where I wouldn't agree with you is the view that the vote was cast when the chair said that he was minded to vote against it effectively, to not go with the officer recommendation, because actually when you look back at the footage, that was not what it was said. He was saying that he was minded to recommend. There was then obviously advice from the planning officers, and so the final decision was made after obviously the planning solicitor had basically given his advice, and you know, the chair indicated what his final decision was. So I appreciate, you know, there will be differing views on that. I absolutely understand that, but
Can I therefore have your undertaking that at some point in the not too distant future, we will have this procedure written down somewhere for future clarity?
It's something that officers have been talking about, and I think also it would be worth doing a session with members as well to talk about some of these things as well. So absolutely, we will bring something forward. So over to you, Chair, I think.
I think I would certainly appreciate that, because it certainly caught me on the hop at the time. But I think in view of the advice I received from the planning manager, I will confirm that my vote was in line with Councillor Barlow's proposal for approval, and I will remain with that view that I voted for approval.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for confirming.
Is that sufficient
confirmation?
confirmation?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, in which case we can move on to today's business, which I'm guessing is probably why quite a lot of people are here. We have I've lost the application number. Here we are. Planning application 240096 MFUL, land just south of Hazelhurst, Raymond's Hill, Axminster. Takes up quite a lot of the agenda pack, pages 33 to 119. And I will go over to Principal Planning Officer Jeremy Ebden to present the report on this one.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. This is an application for the construction of a battery energy storage scheme and associated infrastructure, land south of Hazelhurst, Raymond's Hill, Axminster. This is just an aerial shot showing the context of the proposal in relation to existing surrounding development. Members may well be familiar with the existing renewables infrastructure that's been deployed up in this area. This is probably the most recent solar farm that's being constructed here to the west of the proposed site. The outline of the site shows also the connection through the roadway up to the national grid connection point up in this location. Because of the way the line is drawn, it crosses.
Sorry, can we have the cursor?
Which one? Yeah, sorry. The red line here shows the connection point up to the grid station here, and the way the red line's been drawn, it means that the application falls into two different wards: Parishes, Axminster and Hawkchurch. So this is the more detailed site plan, which shows the main compound area in this location in here. Slightly closer view of the existing site. So slightly complicated red line. So you can see this field here is excluded from the site. This is the main site for the compound, and this is the existing solar farm development to the sides. This shows the layout of the main compound, which shows that it's set back from the roads which bound it to the east and the north. Proposed access point, which has been revised during the course of the application, proposes coming from the north, and there's one that comes in from the east, southeast, and this location here. You can see the arrays of battery storage units arranged in blocks with access roads around the periphery and through the middle, and all the siting of the plant and equipment at the western end. And you'll note there's provision of some water storage tanks at either end of the site as well. There is proposed to be an acoustic fence 4 meters in height around 3 sides of the proposal. There is some fairly substantial existing vegetation around the site already, along the field boundaries and the roadside boundary here, which you'll see in the photographs in a moment. This is a plan indicating the surface water drainage strategy. I will show some closer shots in a moment, just so you can try and read some of the text. But following on from the appeal decision, following public inquiry into a BES site to the northeast of this one a year or two, well, 2 or 3 years ago, the developer has undertaken to provide some mitigation to attenuate and control fire wastewater should such an incident occur. So you'll see here that the whole compound will be lined with an aggregate attenuation blanket to intercept water that may be used during fighting a fire, and there will be some valves on this attenuation basin that ordinarily during normal operation will be open to allow sustainable drainage to operate in the normal manner into the swale here, which also will be lined with a similar membrane. And in the event of a fire and the need to use water to control that fire, these valves will be closed. The storage capacity of this attenuation basin combined is 1,311,000 litres, and the proposed quantity of water stored on the site in the tanks, which you'll see in a minute, is 228,000 litres. So there's more than enough capacity to deal with the water that is stored on the site in this attenuation basin underneath the plant and equipment. Again, this is just showing some of the detail in the notes relating to those details. So again, this is just confirming the storage volume of the different basins. So the figure of 1.3 million litres that I just quoted is just basically a totaling of this. It's expressed in meters cubed here, but to get litres, you just add 1,000. And again, here's some of the notes which you may or may not be able to make out. It just gives the dimensions of the different pipes and chambers and things like that. This is an indicative landscape and ecological mitigation enhancement strategy, which gives you an indication of green infrastructure on the site. And some diagrams here of the access and turning provided for the vehicles that need to visit the site. Detail here of the inverter unit and the substation. It's all obviously fairly utilitarian in appearance. This is an indication of the acoustic fence, 4 meters height. There is a condition recommended that we agree the finish and appearance of that fence. This is a detail of one of the 2 fire water storage tanks, 2 meters tall. This is one of the battery units themselves. Container for spare parts. Security fence. Some CCTV cameras. Can't recall what that is. So moving on to the... Sorry, what was that last one? Can't read the text, I'm afraid. It doesn't come out quite as well as I hope, but it appears to be green infrastructure that sort of surrounds the red line, I would suggest, or up the roadway, up to the substation, and around the site itself. Moving on to some photographs of the site. This is the field, a view across the field in the foreground that will not be developed. It will be the field behind it. And again, looking from the roadway gate across the same fields, you can see the field boundary behind which the compound will be constructed. And this is just a wireframe view from the LVIA, from the developer, the same gateway, indicating the approximate position and height of the development in the field behind that, which you can see in the foreground. This is a view from the road to the north, Stanley Hill. This is the position of the proposed secondary access from the north. You can see this very tall line of trees here, which forms the northern boundary of the field in which the compound would be constructed. And the view, this is taken from the LVIA from further west down Stanley Lane towards the site. The lines here indicating the approximate position of development, which is actually over the brow of the hill. You might be able to make out the contours there. Probably be precluded from seeing it from this point. This is the compound site itself. This is a view from some distance away over to south of Lambert's Castle, I think, towards the site. You can appreciate at this distance it's very hard to make out the site. And a view from footpath near Penn Farm to the southeast. And a footpath from the southwest. This is a view from the Bridle Way south of the solar farm, which is south of the site. You can see the panels in the photograph here and the boundary screening that's being erected here. So there's a winter view, obviously. So members will be aware we've had some correspondence in the last few days about the report expressing some concerns that it hadn't taken any account of the inspector's appeal decision following the public inquiry into a BES site around the corner. Members will note in the report on page 65 there begins a fairly detailed run through of the inspector's appeal decision and the matters that are raised therein. And I've set out in a table, officers set out in a table, all the matters that he was concerned with and are raised as requirements in the National Fire Chief Council guidance, to which the National Planning Practice Guidance now refers us to in considering such applications. And we have been working with the fire service as the agent has as well in developing the application to meet all of the requirements that are set out therein. So going through the table, you can see that there are now 2 separate access points proposed to the site. So fire service can gain access to the site if the wind direction is unfavourable. That's different from the appeal proposal, which had a singular access point. The roads and hard standing and the circulation areas should be suitable for access for fire service vehicles. That has been designed into the scheme, and the fire service has confirmed that it's happy with the proposals on that point. Again, that's the same point as number 3, really. Road networks on the site must be unobstructed. Access to all areas of the facility is possible. Fire service has confirmed that it's happy with that. It is also happy with turning circles, passing places on the site. The distance of the units, the occupied buildings and site boundaries is well in excess of the minimum suggested 25 metres. The separation of the BES units, which is a point of debate, is ordinarily recommended to be 6 metres in the Fire Chief Council guidance, but it does allow for a lesser distance to be agreed where that's supported by evidence. And the applicant has supplied technical information which we have consulted the fire service on, and it has expressed the view that that's sufficient to justify the separation distance as proposed of 3.2 metres. Point 8 in the table, there won't be any combustible vegetation. Given if you look at the layout of the site, you can quite clearly see with the perimeter roads and the fencing proposed that won't be the case. In terms of water supplies, the appeal site that subject to the inquiry did not have any on-site water storage proposed. There is insufficient main supply in this area, so it is necessary to have a water supply ready to go at these sites in this location. And the inspector in that appeal wasn't satisfied that that could be dealt with through a planning condition at the time, but it is now part of this proposal. And the fire service has commented that the quantity of water, in its view, is more than is required to deal with an incident in this location. In terms of signage, there's sufficient signage to be erected to detail all the risks on the site, who to contact in terms of an emergency, how to arrange access and so forth, and there's no objection from the fire service in relation to that. In terms of emergency plans, that is something that will be developed once the site has been, the technology on the site has been decided upon in consultation with the fire service, and that's controlled through a planning condition. In terms of environmental impacts, as I've explained earlier, this whole site will be developed with an attenuation basin underneath it, which will be resistant to chemical degradation and has well in excess of the capacity to store the water that is going to be kept on site to fight the fire. And there is a system in place to ensure that that doesn't leak into the environment with the use of valves to cut off the connection to the swale and further on. In terms of systems design, construction, testing and decommissioning, the fire service again has confirmed that it is satisfied with the standards proposed and that it overall complies with the NFCC guidance. In terms of deflagration prevention and venting, the system will operate in conjunction with the gas exhaust ventilation system, which will minimise deflagration risks. And it will comply with the NFPA 855, NFPA 69 guidelines, which require prevention of dangerous buildup of explosive gases. And again, the Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service confirmed that they're satisfied with the design in relation to this matter. So I would say, members, that officers have looked at the appeal decision from the inquiry into the best site around the corner, the system has been designed in consultation with the fire service, and particularly with these particular issues in mind. And officers are satisfied that on all the points that the inspector has raised in relation to mitigating risks of environmental contamination should an incident occur at the site have been designed to the point that should give you comfort that you could approve the scheme without undue risk to the environment. So in terms of the principal issues, certainly following on from the inspector's appeal decision, I don't believe there's any issue now with compliance with Strategy 39 in terms of the principle. I think the inspector accepted that this type of development is something that can help the deployment of renewable energy and therefore, in principle, complies with Strategy 39. In terms of landscape and visual impacts, the site is stepped back from the road in sort of two different directions, from the road to the north, from the road to the east. There's existing boundary screening in place. There is proposed to be some fairly significant landscaping proposals to help screen the development even further. The site is not best, most versatile agricultural land, so there's no conflict with policy in that respect. In terms of biodiversity, it satisfies all the biodiversity net gain requirements and is subject to the standard conditions plus some additional conditions. There has been an issue raised latterly during the application by the Vincent Bat Trust about a maternity roost to the north of the site. This has been considered by our ecologist in great detail, and the view is that it's quite likely that bats from that maternity roost would be using this site as part of the sustenance area in relation to that roost. And therefore he has suggested that the landscaping and habitat creation on site is improved, enhanced and slightly tailored towards mitigating that particular impact, and that is something that is accommodated in the planning conditions set out in the report. Concerns about effects on dormice similarly have been addressed through revised plans that principally concern the treatment of the roadside hedges, which were considered to be likely beneficial habitat for dormice. There is a planning condition as well, recommended that post-construction the access points are reduced in their width to the minimum necessary to facilitate servicing and fire access, so we can reinstate those hedges post-construction. In terms of highways access, these developments don't generate a great deal of traffic. Most of it is during the construction phase. There's no concerns expressed from the County Highway Authority. There's a construction management plan recommended and a planning condition related to that recommended in the report also. In terms of the benefits of the proposal, obviously these types of developments are designed to aid the transition to a net zero energy system, which is a government priority. These types of developments also are capturing renewable generation that otherwise would be wasted, do have a role in lowering bills more widely for energy generation. And obviously there will be some temporary benefits from the construction of the proposal in terms of economic generation, some of which may be felt locally, some more widely. So in terms of the planning balance, officers are satisfied that the matter set out for the reasons for refusal of the appeal in terms of the design of the site, in terms of the safety features that are necessary to minimise risk to the environment, have been designed into this scheme, and in consultation with the fire authority, officers consider that that matter is satisfactorily addressed. The landscape and visual effects of the development, obviously it will change the character of the site quite significantly, but the site itself is fairly well contained and set back from most public viewpoints. So there will be harm to the character of the site, but the detriment to the wider landscape will be limited and further mitigated with the planting proposed. Biodiversity interests are adequately addressed through the planning conditions. There are no highway objections to the scheme, and officers of the view that the benefits of the scheme are significant enough to outweigh any of the remaining concerns, and therefore the recommendation is to approve subject to the conditions set out.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. So we'll move on to public speakers. We'll start with the objectors. Dr. Karen Goman, have I pronounced that correctly? We are, yes.
The proposed site is in a tranquil area of rural beauty, as you can see from the photos, and deep time depth. It hasn't changed if you look at old maps for many centuries. It has important tourist businesses vital for the local economy, including that of Axminster. It would be absurd for a developer to propose a factory or a chemical plant in this area of high residential and tourist amenity. It's equally absurd and far more dangerous to propose an industrial lithium battery storage site in such a place. The noise of the continuous coolers alone would decimate wildlife over the area, and the rare lesser and greater horseshoe bats who live here and who overwinter in a nearby residence would flee. There have been 3 best fires in the UK so far this year alone. In February, East Tilbury, and one in Aberdeenshire. In March, another one in Cirencester. The Cirencester battery fire had spread to a second container. Both cases demonstrate that sensors, safety systems, and fire suppression does not work. The planning officer's summary recommendation for approval of this BESS makes no reference whatsoever to the aquifer. It was on health and safety grounds and the risk to the very same aquifer that the planning inspectorate based the decision to uphold the refusal of Pound Road BESS. This same aquifer supplies drinking water to many homes, farms and wildlife, both on the Devon and Dorset side. In the event of fire and contamination, how are you going to stop every farm and wild animal, every bird or insect from drinking water in every spring, ditch, stream and river, all fed ultimately by the aquifer? In our property, we have 4 springs. The groundwater within the aquifer and surface watercourses are controlled waters. They may not receive discharges of hazardous substances, such are released during a BESS fire event. The only way of containing a BESS fire is by cooling the surrounding area. This requires more water than is readily available locally. The fire water will inevitably be contaminated and cannot be reliably contained. Professor Paul Christensen states that a BESS fire would affect residents over a 1-kilometre radius. Firefighters at Otay Mesa BESS fire in California last May used 30 million litres of water over 17 days. The Moss Landing fire last January in California burned for 4 days with 100-foot flames, 1,500 people evacuated. Soil contamination has been found 2 miles away, health effects as far away as 6 miles. Residents have filed a lawsuit against owners and battery installers. And here it's worth noting that Clearstone Energy are very proud of the fact that they tend to sell on their approved sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll have the next speaker, Alison Watson. If you could just turn the mic off and back on again, that'll reset the timer. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ali Watson. I am a resident of Dorset rather than Devon, but my property is close to the proposed site for the development of the battery system and would be affected by it were it to be built. Other speakers, I believe, will be addressing the risks of the catastrophe associated with the failure of the technology, including the growing evidence that such failures are a feature of lithium storage rather than a bug. I do not intend, therefore, to cover any of that ground. What I do want to say is that although you are deciding this matter as a Devon planning authority, the site in question is directly on the county border with Dorset. The toxic plume from a fire at a battery site would kill Devon residents if the breeze were onshore, but it would be us Dorset folk who would perish from inhaling the hydrogen fluoride if the winds are blowing offshore from the north. More generally, I want to provide some context for the dangers of this development from the Dorset perspective. The site is on one side of the street. On the other is open farmland that falls away into the Char Valley, a rural setting of family farms that have been unspoilt for centuries. When Lord Bridport was forced to sell the valley and the tenanted farms in the late 19th century, the cottages, farms and buildings throughout the valley were documented in detail. That detail has remained virtually unaltered to this day. The valley is designated as an area of outstanding natural beauty, and as I believe it is now designated part of Dorset natural landscape. The valley is topped by two ancient Iron Age forts preserved by the National Trust, the Charmouth Forest and the village of Whitchurch Canonicorum, whose church has been and still is a designation for pilgrimage and in whose graveyard many historical figures have been laid to rest. However, the valley is characterised by sheep and beef and dairy farms leading down all the way from the proposed site to the Jurassic Coast, a World Heritage Site. Why is this important? The residents on the Dorset side of the road were not officially made aware of the development. Only a few of us found out through word of mouth, and your list of comments does not potentially reflect the feelings, objections and concerns of many people who would be directly affected by the site. Particularly the issue of the aquifer would be a disaster for our side of the county border. The aquifer underneath the development site bubbles up in spring some 200 feet below the top of the valley and feeds the farms and cottages throughout the valley. Almost exclusively, all of these properties are on private water supplies fed from the aquifer. The aquifer also feeds multiple streams that eventually flow from the Char River that passes through the seaside town of Charmouth into the sea. It might seem an interesting academic debate whether a fire will occur, whether it can be moderated, whether there will be an escape of water. In practice, however, any mistake would pollute the Char Valley beyond remediation, ending centuries of farming and village life and impacting an important town on the Jurassic Coast. It seems an easy choice to me to refuse this application because the development seems so inappropriate in the setting and the potential consequences so grave. I hope you feel the same. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could ask supporters to refrain from applause. We generally just try to listen to what people are saying. So if we could hear from Elliot Jones, please, on behalf of the Hawkchurch Action Group.
My name is Elliot Jones. I'm the planning consultant for the Hawkchurch and Monkton Wild Action Group. This presentation is made on behalf of the group, and I will address the points on precedent and the role of the fire service. I will then hand across to Roger Ada, who will address aquifer risk and fire safety, as well as provide a conclusion. This application raises profound risks to public safety and environmental integrity, which mirror the concerns considered by the inspector at Pound Road, and which led the council to refusing the recent proposal at Wareham Road. It should be remembered that the same conditions apply at Pound Road as they do here. Both proposals sit above the same approval for both applications, and the fire service raised no objection to the proposals at Pound Road. Notwithstanding the above, the planning inspector at Pound Road dismissed that appeal because the applicant could not demonstrate that there would be no risk to public safety from the proposal. In other words, the risks arising from the fire at the Bess had not been mitigated to a level that is as low as is reasonably practical. This means that development posed an unacceptable safety risk regardless of the mitigation proposed by the applicant. This was a critical consideration in the inspector reaching his decision to dismiss the appeal. Similarly, the council refused the Wareham Road BESS, citing unresolved safety and environmental concerns. There is no reason why the same approach should not be adopted here. The current proposal does not substantially differ from the previous two refused schemes. In the Pound Road appeal, an experienced planning inspector considered all of the evidence and concluded the risk of contamination to the aquifer was too great, given the dependency of local farms and houses rely on it as a source of water. In the UK has seen multiple BESS fires in recent years, such as at Carnegie Road, Liverpool, the Stratera Energy site at Thurrock, and the Phoenix Battery Recycling Centre at Kilwinnie, Scotland. The applicant has made great play on the safety management procedures that it has put in place. However, recent BESS fires have exposed flaws in battery safety management procedures. At Liverpool, the remote monitoring failed. However, the applicant relies on a similar remote shutdown and automated responses. They assert that the safety has been adequately addressed due to the testing undertaken and that they have a named manufacturer. To support this, the officer's report places great emphasis on the response from the Fire and Rescue Service. However, the Fire Service is not a statutory consultee, nor are they the correct body to confirm whether the safety measures that are being put in place will prevent contamination of the aquifer. This is the role of the Environment Agency, who, when they have engaged with such proposals, state that the approach adopted by the applicant, which is to rely on an impermeable liner beneath the BESS, is wholly inadequate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, we'll hear from Roger Ada.
Thank you. The applicant's approach to water containment and the volume of water required to fight a fire at the BESS is disingenuous. In their fire safety risk note, they state the containment system is sized to contain a minimum of 228,000 litres. We don't recognise the information that the planning officer has put up just now on the swale size, and that this will be adequate because the fire service has advised that only 192,000 litres of water will be required. Only this amount of water will be needed because the technology and safety systems put in place by the applicant. But take reference, please, again, to what was said at the Pound Road appeal, where the size of the firewater containment tank was a determining factor. In that case, the level of firewater required to be held on site was significantly above the capacity of the containment proposed. This is critical because once the containment structure is breached, contaminated water can percolate into the aquifer, polluting it irreversibly. The inspector at Pound Road stated the level of containment required would be in the region of 5 million litres. 5 million. Given this, the provision made by this application is evidently inadequate. The applicant also advised that 228 litres of emergency water would be available on site. This would be held on 2 on-site tanks. Given the conclusion at Pound Road in terms of the amount of water required and the length of time needed to cool the BESS, as well as evidence from Liverpool Road where fire crews were fighting the fire for 48 hours, it is not believable that this amount of water is adequate, particularly as there are no hydrants within the vicinity of the site. The inspector at Pound Road explicitly raised concern about the capacity of the fire service to fight a fire at remote locations such as Hawkchurch. This is due to delayed attendance, lack of local hygiene, and burdens on an already stretched emergency services. The same applies here. We also wish to make reference to the NFCC guidance, which the planning inspector at Parish Road emphasised as a standard to be followed. This has not changed. There has been no update. And the planning officer's assertion that all of those rules have been followed is incorrect. While the publication of revised guidance is awaited, the 2023 version is the key consideration against which all schemes should be assessed, notwithstanding the conclusions by the officers. The NFPA 855, which is the US standard, which is an alternative relied on by the applicant, is only a reference document to the NFCC guidance. It is not an accepted substitute. This was looked at in detail at the public inquiry. Furthermore, the committee should not rely on the imposition of conditions to attach to any concerns regarding the proposal. Any changes that are made via conditions are likely to be substantive, meaning that the development built will be different to that approved. As such, it will be unlawful. Therefore, in planning terms, the application, in our view, is contrary to Strategy 39 and Policy EN 18, in that appropriate measures have not been put in place to protect the surface or groundwater quality. The conflict with Strategy 39 means that the proposed development fails the test in Strategy 7 regarding development in the countryside, where development in the countryside will only be permitted where it is in accordance with a specific plan policy. On behalf of Hawkchurch and Monkton Wild Action Group and the local community, we urge you to reject this proposal for the protection of public health, the environment, and planning integrity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for refraining from applauding what was clearly a very passionate delivery. So next we'll hear from Councillor Mo Dodson from Hawkchurch Parish Council.
Today I speak for Hawkchurch Parish Council, who are fully committed to net zero and renewable energy, demonstrated by the over 100 acres of solar panels in our parish. In a comprehensive survey, however, carried out for our neighbourhood plan, 87% of respondents were against any large lithium battery energy storage systems, BESS for short, in our parish. The reason for the parish's negative view of lithium BESS are the catastrophic consequences of thermal runaway fires to which these machines are vulnerable. And one happening in our area or near our parish would irreversibly contaminate the aquifer that supplies water to our local ecosystems, farms, animals, and multiple dwellings. Rural and tourist economies would be destroyed, resulting in a major loss of jobs, homes, and quality-adjusted life years. The scale of damage of this kind of accident makes this machine high risk in risk management terms. This danger was the main reason for the planning inspectorate's refusing appeal for its very similar BESS in the same area over the same aquifer, and we submit that the applicant's answers to this case precedent have not been met. Lithium BESSes are extremely complex machines requiring very precise control of temperatures and other factors to avoid serious accidents, and are operated and monitored remotely using automated control systems. These machines, therefore, are inherently unstable and highly vulnerable to internal failures, as well as external threats, such as extreme weather and cyber attacks. In a recent survey of manufacturing defects in BESSes, 1 in 4 had quality issues with fire detection and suppression systems, and 1 in 5 with thermal management systems. There have been 3 major BESS fires so far referred to this year in the UK. 1 year ago, again referred to before, there was a BESS fire that took 17 days and 30 million litres of water to bring under control. Worldwide, there have been at least 95 serious BESS fires and thousands of lithium-ion battery explosions, resulting in hundreds of deaths, mass evacuations, and businesses going into bankruptcy. Experts state that in this type of operation, the probability of a catastrophic accident should be treated as if it were a near certainty. Strategy 39 states clearly that the benefits of such an installation must outweigh the harms. The applicant cannot produce robust evidence as to the actual size of the real-life benefits that this BESS will produce, but all parties agree that the benefits will be small relative to the grid's total supply. Because the impact on landscape of an industrial installation is not determined alone on its visibility, according to the guidelines for landscape and visual impact assessment, but also on its active presence within the landscape, this BESS will contribute significantly to cumulative industrialization. The enormous harms that this BESS poses clearly outweigh the very small benefits it may produce. Thus, Hochchurch Parish Council respectfully request that the application be refused in accordance with strategies 7, 33, 39, 46, and EN 18 of the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, we'll move on to the applicant, Simon Rothwell.
Morning. Thank you, councillors, for taking the time today to consider this proposal. My name is Simon Rothwell and I'm the Director of Policy and Strategy at Clearstone Energy, the project developer. The transition to renewable energy generation in the UK promises increased energy security, reduced energy costs and a slowdown in the rate of climate change. Projects such as this are critical to achieving those goals. Where gas-fired power stations can be turned on, off, up and down to match electricity demand, wind and solar generation is of course weather dependent. Battery storage enables electricity network operators to match clean energy generation with electricity demand from homes and businesses by storing electricity when there's too much and releasing it when there's not enough. There is an urgent need for more battery storage in the UK if we are to take advantage of this powerful and clean energy resource. The UK government's new Clean Power 2030 action plan requires a 5-fold increase in UK battery storage within the next 5 years. Axminster substation is the grid supply point for homes and businesses in an area stretching from Seaton to Yeovil. Connecting the Axminster Energy Hub to the substation will help ensure a secure, clean and reliable electricity supply for the region, regardless of whether the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. Contrary to what you've just heard, the project would not put the safety of local residents or water supplies at risks. And objectors understandably draw parallels with the nearby Pound Lane BESS that this committee assessed last year, but from a safety perspective, these are very different proposals. This is evident in our positive collaboration with Devon and Somerset Fire Service and the fact that they have no objection.
There's no such thing as an Axminster Energy Hub.
Excuse me, please don't interrupt speakers. He's doing his best.
So we've specified a battery energy storage system from a leading European technology provider, Wärtsilä. The technology is proven in the field with more than 100 installations globally, including the UK's largest battery energy storage project. Wärtsilä maintains a 100% safety record for these installations. I can confirm that the proposal meets and exceeds guidance for the UK's National Fire Chief Council for battery storage projects, something that was confirmed by Devon and Somerset Fire Service. The companies and the consultants that have worked with us on the safety elements of the proposal are genuine experts in the field. Wärtsilä, the manufacturer, has conducted 4 full-scale fire tests of its technology so that site design decisions, risk assessments, water calculations and emergency response plans can be based on real-world data. Joe Hassel, who's here today, is a highly experienced fire service incident commander who was Deputy Chief Fire Officer for Devon and Somerset until 2022. A fire on the site is not only highly unlikely, it would be contained to a single battery unit and not pose a risk to local residents or water supplies. This has been demonstrated using real-world evidence to the satisfaction of the planning team and the fire service. The proposal, supported by local and national policy, has a recommendation for approval from East Devon's Planning Department, no objections from any statutory consultees, and support from Axminster Town Council. This is a high-quality proposal that would play a significant role in delivering a reliable and clean local electricity supply with minimal impact on the local community. The project team is here today to answer any questions you might have about the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Wendy, did we have a note that Axminster Town Council have actually withdrawn their support?
Yes, the town clerk sent me an email late last night and has asked that I read this out prior to the committee's consideration and debate. So are you happy for me to read it out now?
we'll do it when we've heard, shall we do it when we've heard from the ward members?
Okay.
Oh, yep. Okay, so if we could start with the ward members, Councillor Paul Hayward from Axminster Town Council. Or are you actually, Paul? No, you're not a member of the Town Council, are you? No, no, you're their clerk, but you are the ward member for Axminster.
Thank you, Chair. So just obviously as a member of this authority, I'll declare my own interest as the clerk to that authority. I take their instruction. I'm a ward member and also now the county councillor for Devon as well. Chair, members of planning, I do love electricity. It keeps my internet working, my Netflix streaming, my coffee machine bubbling and my lights illuminated. I understand why we as a country need to develop alternative renewable green energy solutions to keep that power on. But with power comes responsibility, so said Voltaire. And thus anyone proposing this kind of major development in the open countryside needs to provide you, the planning committee, with 100% assurance that the benefits do indeed outweigh the risks and the harm. And if you have any doubt or reservations, then you must refuse and allow the planning process to proceed to appeal for those concerns and doubts to be assuaged and satisfied to the planning inspectorate's satisfaction. This speech isn't about NIMBYism or a Luddite mindset. It's about making sure that green infrastructure doesn't adversely affect our countryside for decades to come, when all those present here have shuffled off and we leave the preservation of East Devon to those who aren't represented today. But I'm going to concentrate on policy matters, as other speakers have eloquently covered other elements of this already. So you've seen within the report references to local plan policies. I've reviewed all of our local plan policies that apply, and I can find harm and contradiction with each of them. So you've got the report in front of you. Local plan S7, the risk to water supply, the environmental impact, incongruous design and build. S39, the visual impact of the site, the environmental consequences of a fire. S46, will this conserve and enhance the landscape character of the area? No, it won't. Does it undermine landscape quality? Yes, it does. Is it appropriate to the economic, social and well-being of the area? No. S47, it fails. S49, it's not compliant. D1, it fails on 5 counts. EN14, 3 counts. EN18, 1 count. And then we refer to the MPPF, which is our cardinal planning document. 135, 137, 165, 187, 189, 198. There are failures all the way through this. No one is doubting the need for green energy solutions in the UK. But it's the responsibility of this committee to safeguard our precious and distinct East Devon landscape and environment. This application is not about the what, it's about the where and the how and the what if. Other speakers have covered the issue of fire and lots of figures have been quoted. This application allows for 228,000 litres of stored firefighting water, described as adequate, but that really represents the bare minimum necessary for the application to be considered just to get over the starting line. You need 150,000 litres of water to put out a single Tesla fire, not that anyone's setting fire to Teslas recently, in a parking lot. 150,000 litres just for one car in a parking lot. This is a major application and there's reference to that in the report. 228,000 litres represents 1,900 litres per minute for 120 minutes, 2 hours. That fire in East Tilbury took 24 hours to extinguish. That's 2.75 million litres of water. The fire in Escondido, 13 hours to extinguish. In Ote Mesa, took them 5 days and it reignited twice. It was smouldering after 11 days. So the general consensus seems to be to reduce risk to firefighters, you just let the fire burn out. You keep people away and you allow that toxic smoke and those flammable gases and heavy metals to go into the atmosphere and then to flutter down when it next rains onto farmland, onto the aquifer, onto people's drinking water. If you allow this application, and I sincerely hope you don't, as others have said, you need to insist on water storage and groundwater capture at least 10 times. 10 times what's being proposed, perhaps 20 times. The planning appeal document referred to this. You need to allow for 24 hours of firefighting activity, not 2. You will not put a fire out in 2 hours. And the damage to Axminster, Axminster Parish, Hawkchurch and Dorset, it will be profound. That's your responsibility as a planning authority, and I urge you to take that seriously for the good of East Devon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we don't hear enough Voltaire quotes here, I think. You know, we should have more at planning, a good guide. Councillor Sarah Jackson has sent in a response. So, Wendy, if you would read that one, thank you.
Thank you. The following are comments from Ward Member Councillor Sarah Jackson. I haven't previously commented on this application, as many of my initial concerns were raised by my councillor colleagues, and as there appear to have been 4 iterations of this application, I felt it sensible to wait until what appeared to be the final version was published. However, having now reviewed all the submission documents, I feel I am unable to support the application for the following 6 reasons. Number 1, unacceptable landscape and visual impact. I profoundly disagree with the officer's application of Policy D1 to the degree that I actually believe it argues against this application rather than advocating for it. The best site lies in open countryside and forms part of the rural landscape setting of Raymond's Hill and the fringe of the national landscape. This is important because while it falls just, and I mean meters, not miles, outside the national landscape, it will still be visible from it and will fundamentally change the character of the area, something which has already been partially undermined by the nearby solar farms. However, the proposed 2.5 metres to 3.5 metre high battery containers, fencing and substation go a step further and introduce new incongruous industrial infrastructure into a sensitive rural landscape setting. The proposed planting will not undo this industrialisation of a greenfield site, which will still be visible from public viewpoints, particularly from the south and from public footpaths. Approval could set a dangerous precedent for further industrialisation of rural sites near substation infrastructure, something which is likely in East Devon given its rural character and the cumulative impact of multiple energy developments in the countryside has not been strategically assessed. Number 2, conflicts with policy designed to protect the countryside. As far as I can see, this is not a site allocated for energy infrastructure, and it certainly sits outside the built-up area boundary. The proposal would erode the rural character of the area, but there is not compelling evidence that this specific location is essential, and I am confident that other locations, perhaps more urban or industrialised areas, or those with more substantive access to water, would prove more suitable and sustainable options. Number 3, fire risk, containment and safety. Best developments will pose a recognised fire risk, one that has been documented globally, but it's not just the risk of fire itself, but the subsequent damage left behind that is of serious concern. Having worked in a company who developed products designed to contain lithium-ion battery fires, I know just how toxic they are and how hard they are to extinguish once they are in thermal runaway. Often, the only course of action is to leave them to burn themselves out, sometimes for days, all the while spewing toxic chemicals into the atmosphere. I remain unconvinced that there is adequate plan in place which would provide reliable and sufficient access to water should a fire incident of this magnitude arise. whilst huge volumes of contaminated water used to contain them may be collected and prevented from contaminated local aquifers. Of this, I am also unconvinced. The chemicals will invariably find their way into adjacent catchment areas due to smoke and prevailing wind. Subsequently, this will contaminate other watercourses, habitats and settlements, including those within the national landscape to the south and the already damaged River Axe catchment to the north, west and northeast, which in turn feeds and triple SI at Seaton wetlands. The likelihood of one battery combusting may be low, although I pay mind to the representation from Hawkchurch Parish Council, who assert that for a site of this size, over its 40-year lifespan, at least one incident is likely. The impact and harm caused as a result would be to the rural environment and those living within a significant area nearby, thus posing a public safety risk at the time of the incident and for a significant period after. Number 4, although noise modelling was submitted, I remain concerned that cumulative noise impact generated from cooling system, transformers and inverters operating continuously, especially given the site's proximity to Hazelhurst and other dwellings. The ambient noise levels in the rural area are very low, and even minimal levels of operation noise could have disproportionate impact. Number 5, the visual and noise impact will not only affect residents, but will also affect several tourist businesses and holiday camps in the immediate vicinity. In turn, this could have a far more profound impact on the local economy where tourists and holidaymakers spend their time and money. Number 6, batteries have a finite lifespan. An operating company could find itself in difficulties at a stage in that period, leading to the site to be closed down for a variety of reasons. I would like to see a comprehensive plan in place for the decommissioning of such facilities so that batteries are not left to rot in the landscape, which could produce even more significant environmental damage, before I could support any proposals of this nature and to prevent the cost falling to the taxpayer out of necessity. I am not opposed to green energy infrastructure by any stretch, quite the opposite, in fact. However, I remain unconvinced that this can be classed as such and equates more to being energy trading infrastructure, but this is a separate debate. That aside, I also remain unconvinced that this application, for the reasons listed, and until my reservations can be satisfied, I will find it hard to reconcile supporting a battery storage facility in this location. May I thank the Planning Committee for their consideration of these concerns.
Thank you, Wendy. And then you've got one from Simon Smith as well.
Yeah, it's another long one. So thank you for the opportunity to comment on this application. While I align with the concerns for my fellow ward members raised, I wish to highlight additional 4 points that I believe are crucial from a planning perspective. Number 1, long-term environmental risk and decommissioning. The site is proposed for a 40-year operational lifespan. While I note that a planning condition has been proposed requiring full decommissioning of the BESS infrastructure within 12 months of ceasing operations, I remain concerned about the enforceability of this condition. There is no mention of a financial bond or escrow mechanism to ensure decommissioning is carried out if the operator or landowner becomes insolvent. In such a case, the financial and environmental burden may fall on the local planning authority or the taxpayer. The uncertainty undermines confidence in the ability to restore the land to its original condition, particularly given the extent of groundworks, below ground cabling and the presence of impermeable membranes that may degrade over time. 2. Cumulative impact and landscape sensitivity. The development lies just metres from the boundary of the Dorset National Landscape and is visible from the public highways and permissive bridleways. Although mitigation through hedgerow reinforcement is proposed, the introduction of 7.5 metres substations, steel fencing and acoustic barriers still constitutes a significant change to the rural character of the area. The officer's report acknowledges a localised adverse landscape impact and the reliance on ash tree screening, vulnerable to dieback, may weaken mitigation over time. The cumulative effect of existing and proposed solar and storage infrastructure in this area has not been fully assessed, and there is a genuine risk of precedent being set for further industrialisation of rural land near substation infrastructure. Number 3, fire risk and water containment. Although the application meets some NFCC guidance and includes 2 emergency water tank and in brackets 114,000 litre each, close brackets, serious concerns remain about whether this would be sufficient in a full thermal runaway incident. The Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service and others highlight the unpredictability of lithium-ion battery fires, which may require defensive firefighting lasting several days and producing highly toxic runoff. There is doubt over whether the proposed bund and attenuation basin could contain contaminated water in the event of prolonged rainfall or multiple containers being involved. The impermeable membrane proposed may also be vulnerable to failure under extreme heat or chemical exposure. Number 4, amenity impact, noise and tranquility. Whilst an acoustic barrier is proposed, there is no specific low-frequency noise assessment included. Given the quiet rural setting and the presence of residential properties nearby, even modest operational noise from cooling systems and transformers may have a disproportionate impact. Low-frequency hums associated with substations are a known issue, and their long-term effects on health and amenity should not be undermined. Conclusion. While I support low-carbon energy infrastructure in principle, this application does not convincingly demonstrate that its benefits outweigh the environmental impact and amenity harms it may cause. I am particularly concerned about the lack of financial safeguards for decommissioning, the unresolved risks of catastrophic fire and water contamination, and the cumulative industrialisation of rural East Devon landscapes. Until these concerns can be satisfactorily addressed, I cannot support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. We'll give your voice. Well, do you want to give your voice a rest, or do you want to tell us what Axminster
Yep.
Town Council have said while you're about it?
I can do that, and then I'm done then.
Yep.
So they would like me to read out the following. In accordance with Resolution FC 25/147 AME of the annual meeting of the full Axminster Town Council held on the 12th of May 2025, this council hereby withdraws its support for the BESS application, planning application 24/0096/MUFL, in light of the new information which has been received by this council from third parties. This is contrary to the previously submitted decision of the council. Thank you.
Well, that was brief, wasn't it? Yeah. Some relief, I should think. And finally, Councillor Duncan McKinder from Yardley Ward.
Thank you, Chair.
Due to time constraints, I will not repeat my detailed comments on the application that you have available to you in the documentation pack. I feel that those comments remain relevant and urge the committee to give them careful consideration. Today, I will concentrate on what I view as the most important aspects, though I agree with everything that's been said by the comments we've already had from the local community and from other ward members and the town council. I fully agree that as a country, UK needs to transition energy supply from high carbon sources to renewables, which add little or no CO2 to the atmosphere. This is used to justify the local plan strategy 39, which supports renewable and low carbon energy projects. However, this strategy states that such projects are only to be supported if they follow current best practice guidance and the adverse effects on features of environmental and heritage sensitivity are satisfactorily addressed. The most significant environmental risk associated with this application is a thermal runaway, as we've heard many times, and I do beg the committee's forgiveness for repeating some of the information we've already heard, but I feel it is really important to listen to these arguments. So the most important environmental risk is associated with a thermal runaway resulting in a fire in one or multiple containers. The application has 50 containers of batteries. Lithium battery-based fires are very different from almost any other fire in that they burn for prolonged periods, as we've already heard, and they do so without the need for oxygen from the surrounding environment, as the breakdown of the battery components creates oxygen and other flammable and toxic gases. Such fires must be cooled for extended periods of time, days, not hours, as we've heard from incidents that have occurred in this country and around the world with these BESS systems. So they must be cooled for these extended periods of time if they're not to reignite spontaneously, and this requires significant quantities of water, as we've already heard. UK best practice in fighting BESS fires is described in the National Fire Chief Council NFCC guidance from 2023. A revised version has been consulted on, but until adopted, the NFCC website, which I checked last night, states clearly the 2023 variant is current. We should therefore expect that design, site layout, aspects relating to management of any thermal runaway, together with comments from the Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service on this application, should follow NFCC guidance, rather than assuming that some aspects, such as spacing between containers, can be relaxed without providing detailed evidence to prove departure from NFCC guidance is in fact safe. An assurance from the battery manufacturers that the specific battery design is safer than early battery types is not satisfactory on this point in my view, and thus this application fails to meet the preconditions for strategy 39 that best practice is used and that the adverse impacts on the environmental sensitivity are satisfactorily addressed. Without being able to meet the requirements of strategy, we're compliant with strategy 39, this application also fails to meet strategy 7, which restricts developments outside of built-up areas. NFCC guidance provides information on the minimum quantity of water required for firefighting and cooling based on a reference 1 megawatt installation. Note that each of the 50 containers in this application is about 3 megawatts, so the volume of water required is 3 to 150 times greater than the NFCC document, depending on how many containers either ignite or need to be cooled to prevent fire spreading. As we've heard, the design includes 2 on-site water tanks, which together provide firefighting water for about 2 hours. There being no fire hydrants mentioned in the locality, we have to assume that if any firefighting is required beyond there, within those 2 hours, the fire service can appear on site with significant additional quantities of water for a period of days. Water used to cool any containers that have ignited will run off, carrying a range of toxic chemicals and extremely corrosive hydrofluoric acid, which will burn through concrete in the right concentrations. The site sits above the aquifer from which many local residences and farming businesses obtain their water supply. This aquifer and those local water courses are controlled waters, And this application must therefore demonstrate how those control waters are protected, both during normal operation and in the event of a fire. To prevent damage to those control waters, all water applied for firefighting and cooling purposes must be prevented from leaving the site, either leaving through local ditches or by soaking into the underlying ground beneath the site or surrounding the site. The application does
I
provide an
need to ask you
attenuation
to start rounding up
Okay.
now, Duncan, if you
The
don't
application
mind.
provides an attenuation tank, but this is not going to contain the quantities of water that are likely to be required. I think it's, given the potential for environmental damage in the event of an incident here, I find it very disappointing that the Environment Agency, whilst I recognise they're not a statutory consultee, have not been very strongly encouraged to comment, because we're taking our they're taking statements that this is environmentally safe based on comments by the Fire and Rescue Service rather than the relevant agency in this country, the Environment Agency. We need them to opine on the environmental safety of this sort of application. So I would...
yeah, if you could conclude now, Duncan.
Okay. All I would say in conclusion is that I would hope that you would agree with me, after careful study of these documents, that this application must be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Jenny?
Can we have a comfort break, please?
Yes, I was about to suggest that. We've been going for well over an hour and a half now, so I suggest 10 minutes be enough for everybody. We'll resume at 10 minutes to 12. Right. We can resume. So, members, we have heard all the representations. So we are now on to questions, and I think you may have a few. I will advise that the applicant has with him a number of experts. Obviously, we can call on them to give advice if members feel that if the officers don't feel they have the sufficient expertise, but we will have to bear in mind that those experts are representing the applicants, and I'm not suggesting they would be biased, but we have heard quite a lot of technical detail from objectors, and I think it would not be unfair to allow the applicant to also present some of those points if members have technical questions. So, on to questions. I don't know which was first, Councillor Wragg or Councillor Faithful. We'll take Councillor Wragg first anyway.
Thank you, Chair. Having read what arrived yesterday from the Hawke Church Action Group and read the appeal from previous application for Pound Road, could somebody tell me how this application varies substantially from the Pound Road one? Please, that's one question. Do you want me to ask them all together or one at a time?
I think it probably makes sense to ask them all now, and
Right,
then
that's one-
officers can decide
one
which ones they
question.
can field. I think officers can deal with that one.
Okay. Another one. I can't see anything in here from the Environment Agency at all, apart from no response received. Is that right? Have I missed something?
I don't think so. I think that's right. We can give an instant answer to that. Yeah.
Well, I find that extraordinary.
Yeah. Ditto.
And the water storage, would that be the attenuation pond only?
Okay.
I'll start
Over
with
to you, Jeremy. Yeah.
Start with the last question. The attenuation basin lies under the entire BES compound and has the 1.3 million litre storage capacity. The swale really is just to deal with sustainable drainage during normal operation from rainfall, etc. During an incident, it's proposed to close a valve between the attenuation basin and the swale to prevent the fire wastewater going into it.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be sufficient to extinguish a fire of any proportion, significant proportion.
But you're asking about is the water sufficient?
Yeah.
To extinguish the fire according to the fire service? Yes.
Okay. And the last question I think is Axminster Town Council received information from a third party which caused them to withdraw support for the application. Are we allowed to know, maybe Councillor Hayward could tell us who that third party would be who advised Town Council?
Yes, if you know, Councillor.
In my role as their town clerk, they considered the application which has subsequently followed. I believe there's one at Newlands Farm, which contained information generally about the aspects of BES, and they also received representations from the Hawke Church Action Group too. I think it's similar to the information you have received, and that was put forward last night by a member and then voted upon.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy,
yeah, I'll come back to the first question.
Oh, yes.
Because that was quite a big one. So the differences between the site subject of the public inquiry and this proposal, as far as I can recall, just basically starting with the layout for a start. I mean, there's two access points proposed for this proposal. The appeal had a singular access point from the east. And that's important, yeah, because the fire service requires that there's 2 different compass points worth of access, so if the fire's in a particular direction, they can actually get into the site. Obviously, you'll note, as I've mentioned earlier, the site is set back at least a field's worth from each of the roads near to the site, whereas the appeal site was pretty much fronting onto the road, so there was more likelihood of a visual impact in relation to that scheme as well. The layout of the site, the compound itself, compared to the appeal site, the proposal before you now has sufficient circulation, manoeuvring, turning space to allow fire vehicles to access it in any corner of it, whereas that wasn't the case at the appeal site, as far as I recall. I don't recall what the separation of the BES units proposed at the appeal site were, but it was less than the 6 metres, so they're both less than the 6 metres proposed. But there wasn't any evidence provided in relation to that appeal proposal to justify, according to the inspector, those lesser separation distances, whereas there has been evidence provided in relation to this proposal which satisfies the fire service on that particular point. The appeal site didn't have in the proposal a water supply proposed, and the inspector wasn't content to leave that to planning conditions. Obviously, this proposal before you now has 2 water tanks proposed for water storage, which the fire service have commented saying they think that's adequate. Additionally, there is an attenuation membrane proposed to form the attenuation basin under the entire compound to retain the firewater. That wasn't proposed as part of the plans on the appeal site, and the inspector wasn't content to leave that to planning conditions either. The acoustic fence is part of the proposal before you now, whereas on the appeal proposal there was no acoustic fence proposed, and the inspector again wasn't happy to leave that to a planning condition. It was proposed during the appeal proceedings by the appellant, I believe, but he wasn't content to leave that because of the obviously fairly large presence that would have, and people had a chance to comment on it. So those probably are the main differences between the 2 proposals.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's very thorough, actually. So thank you for that, because there's obviously a considerable number of differences between the 2 sites, and also a number of similarities, obviously. And I think that's helpful to know, because it's always dangerous, and we must remember to treat each application on its own merits and not to compare with other applications which may not be comparable. Councillor Faithful.
Thank you, Chair. First question, well, I've just stood for an election. This is for 750,000 homes for 10 hours is what the batteries are supposed to hold. I just stood for election for Honiton Division, and I delivered 7,500 leaflets, and I did pretty well every house I could find. So, first question is, why here? Why at this specific location? It's not for the local community, it's covering a huge area and a very large number of homes. So why at this location? Which I suppose is to the applicant. Also, water. In the event of contamination, will the applicant guarantee addressing water supply to the communities who are impacted? And what is there to show that, I mean, if this gets sold on to somebody else, will that following owner take that responsibility? And what happens if they go bankrupt? permeable or impermeable. So the membrane, it said it's permeable membrane. That, unless I've got this wrong, doesn't that mean that the water can go through it? And what action will be dealt with? The pond is supposed to take contaminated water, so how will they deal with the contaminated water when it's contaminated? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass over to Jeremy in a minute. I'll just say that the 750,000 houses, I think, is an illustration of the capacity of the battery storage, not an indication that it's going to supply 750,000 local homes, because that's not the way the national grid works anyway. It's taking power from the grid and
It's got
returning
nothing
it
to do with the specific location. It's
No.
nothing, so it doesn't
No,
need to be
no,
here
indeed.
at all.
No, indeed. So yes, it's not because we're close to 750,000 homes. So I'll ask Jeremy if he can answer those other questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'll answer what I think I can. I mean, why here? I mean, it's usually a combination of proximity to the grid connection with the substation up the roads and a willing landowner. In terms of who supplies water in the event of contamination to the site, it's not something I feel that I can answer. The membrane is proposed to be impermeable, so it contains water. The way it functions is during ordinary operating times, it will discharge into the swale, which will discharge water into the local environment in line with normal sustainable drainage requirements. In the event of an incident, fire, there'll be a valve closed between the attenuation basin and the swale, so the water ought not to go into the swale. But the swale itself, as I mentioned earlier, is also lined with an impermeable membrane of a similar sort used in the attenuation basin.
Yes, but that doesn't say if the pond is contaminated, what do you do with the contaminated water once it's contaminated? You can't just leave it in the pond and say, well, there you go, get on with it.
I believe the idea is to pump it back into the storage tanks, which would have been emptied by then. And then they'll be disposed of. They'll be disposed of with vehicles to a disposal facility.
Okay. So, Councillor Ian Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just confirm, I think one of the big things on the previous appeal was the lack of detail that was given at that time that seems to be, in this case, has been answered, especially about the type of batteries used, because I believe there's a big difference between lithium-ion batteries and the newer ones that they are saying they're going to use. I couldn't see a condition about the new type of lithium-ion, as I said, look, I'm not an expert in this, but lithium-ion phosphate batteries, there's a big difference in their safety record and their ability to catch fire, temperatures they can work under, etc. So if we were, should we do this, can we make it a condition that the minimum type of battery, in other words, what the fire officer has looked at and given his opinion on whether this is safe or not, that is what he's given an opinion on, these, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Wartzillers, battery packs, whatever. If there, can we make a condition that it must be that or better? And also, can we change at this point? Can we say, because I've looked at where the water tanks are going to go, and much as the fire officer says that's enough, and they are the experts, and I know we're supposed to listen to experts, but on leaning on the side of safety, can we say to them on the slabs they put down for the water that we want double the amount of water? There seems to be more than enough area to do that, if not more than that, just to be on the safe side of it. And I'll leave it at that. Answer those, please, Chair.
Thanks, Ian. I think in terms of the type of battery, if that's what's been proposed, that's what must be installed, because the normal phrasing that we use in the conditions is that it must proceed in accordance with the plan submitted. So I'll ask Jeremy just to confirm that they have specified the type of battery to be used. Thank you, Brian. I've got you, and Jenny. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the type of battery, there are quite a bit of details in the submitted documents about the technology being used. I must admit I can't recall exactly what it is, but there are differences between some of these sites, certainly in terms of what's being proposed over time, and they will have different benefits and disbenefits. We could, if members felt it necessary, apply a planning condition to ensure that the type of battery proposed in those documents are the ones that are deployed. This area of technology is quite rapidly evolving, but it does leave us with the possibility of having to revisit an alternative through a variation of planning condition in the future, should the developer wish to use a different type of cell.
But that would give us that element of control, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. Yeah. Yes, it would. Yeah, certainly. That's a perfectly sensible suggestion, I think. Could we ask for more water? We certainly could, but I don't think we could simply ask for larger tanks or more tanks without having to revise the application properly and go back and consider other matters. If there is space there available, as you can see, but a lot of that also is bound up with BNG calculations, the considerations of habitat for bats, etc. So we could ask them for more, but we'd need to weigh in all those other considerations to see if it would work. And I don't think we could leave that to a planning condition, unfortunately. It would probably require an amendment to the scheme to go back and reconsider all those matters.
Sorry, Chair, the concrete pad that tank sits on, you can see that it's the BNG is not going to mount. It's already got the concrete pad down on it. So would it not be a simple thing to just make it? It's going to make it literally, I don't know, about 4 foot extra diameter around the outside of it to double the size of that tank because it's a circle.
Chair, I think perhaps maybe the applicant could answer that. Again, no, that might not affect the BNG. It might affect the circulation space for the fire service to get their vehicles around it. I couldn't say with certainty without having a closer look at it rather than looking at the screen now.
If we can, Chair, that'd be...
Yeah, could we ask the applicants if they would be prepared to consider doubling the amount of water capacity? Is there anybody able to answer that question? Drawn the short straw there.
Just introduce myself, committee. My name's Joe Hassell. I'm previously the Deputy Chief Fire Officer of Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service. I'm an independent consultant and also run a fire training business, training firefighters across the country. So just to answer the question of water, if we just go back a bit, the water on the site is there for boundary cooling only. That's recommended through the NFCC and their procedures, which means it won't be used to extinguish the fire in a unit. So fire service procedures are, you allow the fire to burn. That's the same as Wärtsilä's procedure. You allow the fire to burn out. If you need to, you use boundary cooling. You protect any containers that may be affected by fire that are neighbouring. The test that Wärtsilä have done, their 4 different burns tests, shows that there is no impact on any other units. It would only be the fire in that container. Therefore, the water on site is purely there for a kind of an additional safety mechanism if for any reason the fire service did decide to cool some of the other units, because they'll have temperature gauges in them fed through to the panel on the, they can see whether they're getting warm or not. They also have thermal imaging cameras. They then may decide to cool some of the water. That water will then go into the basin and be pushed out. Now that water shouldn't be contaminated because it hasn't been put on any fire. There are no products of combustion in it. It's there just for cooling. It would it's there as a safety measure. The water's there as a safety measure. 228,000 litres is adequate. The National Fire Chiefs Council recommend that. In fact, the new draft recommendation, although isn't published yet, reduces it to 180,000 from 228, based on evidence of other fires where they've used it. So I just wanted to clear up what the water's used for. It's not for extinguishment, it's for boundary cooling, and the water therefore is adequate. However, if they did decide to put water on the fire, if they did decide to, and there was some contamination in the water would be contained on site by shutting the valve. That would then be tested to ensure that it is safe levels and can then be let back into the normal drainage system, or if it is over those levels, the safe levels, it would then have tankers in from a private company to pick that up, take it away and treat it.
Okay, sorry, I can't take representations from objectors, but I did just want to ask one question. If the fire safety routine now is to allow these to burn out, what are the health and safety implications of those? Because we've heard from people talking about toxic smoke and so on. If you're able to answer that, I'd be very grateful.
Yeah, so the fire service will put in a 30-metre cordon. They won't go any further than that without breathing apparatus on to make sure that they, that is contained within the site, and they'll normally put in a 60-metre area so communities wouldn't get closer to 60 metres, which again is contained within the site of the field. The testing, the plume testing that is in the application pack shows that the toxic, there would be some toxic fumes coming from any fire there, as there would be any fire. That would be contained within the site. Again, it's toxic for firefighters up to about 5 metres, which is why they're where their breathing apparatus, and then it dissipates, I think it's about 25 metres, which is quite some distance from any road or any populated areas.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, it's no use. I'm sorry. It is no use. We cannot have. I'm sorry. You've all made your statements. They've been heard by the committee. I'm sorry if. No, I'm sorry. Thank you. You can sit down. Okay, but I have to ask you not to object. I will have to clear the room if we persist in heckling. I'm sorry, but shouting at people giving their opinion is heckling. No, there is no point of order here. The procedure is established that the objectors get their chance to speak, and then we go to questions from councillors. We've heard all the representations. It's now for councillors to make up their minds, and I've already pointed out that we should bear in mind that those people who've come with the applicant will be giving advice in good faith, but we do have to consider that they may be, let's say, they're going to put the best case. Please, councillors are not stupid. We're quite capable of making up our own minds. Okay, we'll move on to Councillor Anne Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Question number 1, because having heard that they leave batteries to burn themselves out, does a battery, when it burns itself out, just burn out within its container and therefore there's no spillage, because then it's self-contained? But if it's actually melts down and the toxic stuff comes out, how is that going to be contained and cleared up? Another question, what is the membrane made of for the attenuation? I know it's impermeable, but we know this stuff is corrosive
because we've heard it can actually go through concrete. So what is it actually made of? I couldn't find it in there. And have we had a survey of the hum of the batteries, substation, etc., on the wildlife, especially bats, because their hearing's really high pitch? I'm concerned about the environmental impacts of the nature in the area as well as humans. But that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Yes, I had actually made a note as well whether the ecologist had considered noise impacts. It is low frequency noise, I believe, but we'll see if Jeremy is able to answer some of those, and if not, perhaps we can ask somebody from the applicant team.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have to hand specific information on what the material is to make up the membrane. In terms of noise effects, there has been noise surveys. They came back and did a low frequency noise survey because that was requested by the environmental health officer, and that was deemed to be satisfactory. As to the effects on bats of that equipment functioning, I'm not aware of any specific comments from our ecologist around that, but he has given his advice on the effect of the development on bats. It's primarily to do with the change to the sustenance zones related to that maternity colony north of the site. I wouldn't be able to answer questions as to how the noise affects, the different frequencies they're sensitive to relative to what the equipment is proposed, I'm afraid.
Okay, sure.
Sorry, if I could just add to that. So in terms of the membrane, it is stated that it is resistant to corrosive material, so it has been designed with the battery, the use of the site in mind, so that it doesn't degrade under certain toxic matters. I think that's mentioned in the supporting evidence. I think it was also mentioned by the speaker earlier today. In terms of, again, sort of any toxic materials that might be emitted from the fire, again, anything that did, if there was any leakage from the container itself, I think they are designed to be, again, resistant to corrosive fluids, etc. However, of course, anything that was to go onto the ground within the BES area, and that might leach into the ground, would be caught by that impermeable membrane. And as was mentioned, any contaminated waters within that would be tankered away if needs be, if the levels were not safe to be released out into the environment. On the matters of the hum, the noise is impacts with bats. Our ecologists, we would anticipate to consider all possible impacts from a scheme like this. So I would expect that had there been any concerns about noise levels and any potential adverse on bats, that they would have raised those as concerns, and they didn't. Thanks.
Thank you for that answer. So have we got a clean-up schedule of how the site could be cleaned up after an incident? Because that's going to be essential. Otherwise, you could be contaminating particles back through the system.
Jeremy, do we know what the...
Is your question in relation to the BES unit itself, or the water, or...?
The whole lot. Anything that's contaminated, how do we deal with it? Thank you.
I would anticipate it'd be like any industrial warehouse that might contain toxic chemicals that has a fire. Then there are obviously industry standards. There will be permitting things outside of planning that would control, from a health and safety perspective, how you remove contaminated products from land into suitable waste receptors, if that was the case. It's not something we would ordinarily condition when we do regularly grant planning permission for industrial buildings, which, you know, as a consequence of a fire could have similar impacts. I think the key thing, I think, which is an important consideration to have knowledge of, is how would any contaminated water be dealt with? And the applicants have already given an explanation on that, that it would be tankered away. There is a planning condition requiring a safety, a battery safety management plan. So condition 15. So that is requiring that it basically sets out how the battery safety will be managed for its lifetime. So within that, obviously, could incorporate other matters. So it does specifically say, actually, in the reason, so in the interests of minimising risks of hazardous events which could lead to pollution of the local environment. So they're obviously within that. But it would be difficult because to set out the strategy, the cleanup strategy, without actually understanding the incident is hard to do. So it would just have to be, you know, best practice in accordance with whatever pollution, if there has been any, has actually taken place.
Okay. Councillor Matt Hall.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions. Firstly, one of the main concerns with this application, and I believe the previous application, is to do with the potential for pollution of the aquifers. Now, obviously, as stated by Councillor Ragg and in the officer's response, no response was received from the Environment Agency. But can the case officer please confirm that the Environment Agency was actually chased up for a response? And was it explained to them, as I had to do when dealing with an S system, that I wanted specifically their responses to the risks of pollution? Second question, the other main issue, I think, with this application, and again, similar to the previous one, is the issue of safety. Now, can somebody please answer why the submission of the battery safety management plan in condition 15 is not a pre-commencement condition, because surely it should be? And finally, bearing in mind that condition 5 refers to 40 years with regards to the life of this, why are so many of the other conditions, such as 9, only referring to 30 years? Surely, if something is 40 years in one, everything else should tally to 40 years as well. Thank you.
Okay, Jeremy.
Chair, I can't recall specifically, given the timescale this application has been going, whether the EA has been chased specifically. I know we have a number of these applications in this area, and they have responded on others saying, why are you consulting us on this? We're not statutory consultees. So I can't recall specifically on this one if we've chased them up. With regards to condition 15, could it be a pre-commencement condition? I think it probably could be a pre-commencement condition. With regards to the question around 40 years, I think that's probably a bit of a hangover from actually when solar farms first became a thing and there was a feed-in tariff for a certain period of life, and solar farms were sort of linked to that. I think as solar farms have been proposed in more recent years, that tends to be less and less important. I think it's turned up on these sort of applications as well, probably for legacy reasons related to that more than any practical reason. The specification of 30 years in relation to condition 9, I believe, is really just industry practice in terms of landscape advice, and that 30 years is usually about the most we can insist upon. But I would have thought, I wouldn't be anticipating after 30 years they go in and suddenly undo all their landscape work. I mean, it just seems unrealistic, to be honest. But if members felt they wanted to change it, they could consider that.
Sorry, Wendy.
Just on the matter of the battery safety management plan, my understanding is that the reason for it in previous matters when we've considered it is because it hasn't always been clear exactly what the battery technology is going to be, and depending on the battery technology will determine the detail and specifics of the battery safety management plan. So that's why it's been put on as a condition. And as a not as a we haven't had it up front, but certainly so I think keeping it as a condition is a reasonable way to go. But yes, it could be if it isn't already pre-commencement. It is pre-commencement, yeah. So I think the reason for that, not having it up front, is because of the fact that the battery technology may ultimately differ. Thank you.
Can I just say that with regards to condition 15, it doesn't actually use the term pre-commencement. It just says prior. It should say pre-commencement, in my opinion. And I believe it should be that because as this application, as with previous application, councillors and ward members and residents have been really concerned about safety. And I feel that we should be using the pre-commencement system to make sure that we are dotting as many I's and crossing as many T's as possible. And if I can just say, perhaps for future reference, I have found with the Environment Agency, you need to be very specific in what you're asking them to comment on. That's just my advice. You can take or leave. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steve Gazzard.
Thank you, Chair. On the map that's up there in front of us, obviously, should there be an incident on this site, in my view, it would be declared a major incident, which would not just only involve the fire service, it would involve other services, i.e. the ambulance service, South West Water, Environment Agency. Where are all these vehicles going to be parked, please?
Chair, well, I imagine there'll be an incident commander at such a site, and they'll be in charge of matters like that.
Yeah, can I just come back then? Okay, yeah, I understand that. But it won't just be a call put in saying we need an ambulance, because if you've got X number of vehicles, fire service vehicles there, you need to have an ambulance or ambulances in attendance for the safety of the fire service. So, as was explained earlier, it's not just a case of saying we want an ambulance there, please, ASAP, because it don't work like that. The same as with the fire service, it doesn't work like that because there are other incidents. So my other question is, has there been any consultation with the ambulance service on this particular application, please?
No, Chairman.
Sorry.
So no, the answer was from Ms. Evans was no. I mean, there is, as you can see on that plan, plenty of space within the red line itself, but depending on the extent of the fire, direction of wind, etc. But there's nothing to suggest that ambulances can't attend this site any more readily than they can attend any other site. It's not something that I think is the parking of emergency vehicles. I don't think is really going to be a key issue in this instance.
Okay. Councillor Brian Bailey.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a few questions. The first one is, has anyone consulted the local fire brigade, which I assume would be Axminster, Bridport? I don't know the area that well, but has anyone from our planning department contacted them in regard of how long it would take them to get there, and have they got the right equipment to deal with it, And have they got bowsers so they can take in extra water? That sort of thing.
Well, Chair, the consultation was with the Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service, being the relevant service for this site. We haven't contacted any local branches specifically. I assume in deliberating their response that the fire service would have considered matters like that in terms of availability of units, where they are, type, facility, equipment that they might need. So I would hope that that was all accounted for in the response from the Devon Somerset Fire and Rescue Service.
Thank you very much for that. But hope and assuming in a situation like this is, quite frankly, in my opinion, not good enough. It needs to be a definite yes or no, not a maybe or possibly we can. What I'm thinking of, if there's a fire in Axminster and the fire engine goes to Axminster and there's a fire and involves saving people's lives, you know, and then the same day this blows up, who's going to attend to it? We don't know. We're just hoping that someone will come from somewhere else, which is going to take several hours. There's not a decent plan. I'm quite frankly, I'm very disappointed with the whole thing. I don't think, I can't support it at all. I'm sorry to say that. Thank you.
Yes.
Could I, just to give a bit of clarity, Devon and Somerset Fire Service covers Axminster. So perhaps I think it's reasonable to assume that the Devon and Somerset Fire Service will look at how the whole fire service functions over the entire two counties and how the local services would respond. So I don't think there would be any necessity or there's been any failing in not consulting the local fire services. The key person are the overall overseeing, overarching body, which is the Devon and Somerset Fire Service.
I quite understand that. The question I put, if they're on an emergency in Axminster, and there's one fire engine, how does anyone come to this one? There's going to be a longer distance. It's probably going to take several hours. By that time, the place could be well ablaze, couldn't it? It's a lack of response time that concerns me. And also the madness of building on an aquifer. I just can't get over it. I can't get round the fact that anyone would want to do this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jenny Brown.
I've forgotten what it was now.
Yeah, I know, it was a long time ago, Jenny.
Right, okay, so this application came in 24, and since then you've had the fire in Essex in February, which has highlighted the danger of these BESS systems. Did our planning officers go back to the applicant to say what sort of measures would you be putting in place considering the recent fires? And has the applicant looked at the immersion technology? Because I think we ought to have on 15 some form of really strong, totally up-to-date method of containing these. Because everybody agrees it's good to save the energy, but not at the risk of human and nature. Thank you.
Chair, we've certainly gone through the fire safety mitigation measures at some length in consultation with the fire service, with the applicants. We don't do it specifically every time there may be a fire incident somewhere else. What we're focusing on is making this proposal as safe as it can be, following the guidance of the National Fire Chief Council guidance, and following the advice of the fire service. I didn't quite understand the question about condition 15, but as I understand from the applicants we heard earlier, the units are proposed to be fairly self-contained in the event of an incident, and they also have the attenuation basin beneath it.
I asked if they'd looked at the immersion technology, which is some of the latest things going forward.
I can't answer that, I'm afraid. That's not something I know.
We could ask the applicant if they took that into account, Jenny. Is anybody from the applicant's team able to answer that one?
So is the question about whether we can immerse the battery in water? I think the answer is that's not how the fire service or the manufacturer or anybody involved in the battery safety industry would deal with a battery fire. As Joe explained, it's about letting the fire burn out. Tests showing that's between 8 and 9 hours for the battery unit in question. And if required, calling adjacent units to ensure that the fire doesn't propagate. But throughout those 4 tests that the manufacturer undertook, there was no water applied at any point, and there was no propagation from one unit to another unit. Does that help?
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, Jenny. Councillor Del Haggerty.
Thank you, Chair. Quite a few of my questions have been answered. I'd like to emphasise about the Environment Agency, because we have got to be specific in a project like this. I think we must insist, and I agree with Councillor Matt Hall, that we've got to be asking direct questions to get the answers we want with a project like this. My other question, which hasn't been come up yet, we're all talking about fire prevention, how much water and everything else, and what happens if there's a fire. It sounds to me, and I'm going to ask the question, is what is the likelihood of having a fire? Because it's very much being emphasised. So if it's very, very high, are we looking at the wrong thing?
Chair, I don't know how we can compel the Environment Agency to comment on these matters. I mean, I have written to the service recently, and Mrs. Ormsby could comment on this, just to beg us to stop needlessly consulting them on things they don't have any role in commenting on. In terms of the likelihood of fire, I mean, that's obviously a matter of contention between various parties. I don't have any data, but the proposal presented is as I understand it, it's fairly well up to date in terms of, as was mentioned just now, the tests that have been run to ensure safety, and has been designed in consultation with the fire service and in line with the guidance that the government directs us towards. So in terms of the policy and regulatory landscape at the moment, I think it's about as good as it gets.
Okay, thank you. So, do you want to come back, Del?
Yeah, please. Yeah. If there is an incident, in the likelihood or unlikelihood of being an incident, one of the previous questions, which was one of my own as well, the vehicles, if we know there'd be a commander looking after an incident, but there must be the facility to have lots of vehicles, which it would be in an incident like this, because you can't have them queued up in a lane. So you'd be taking turns. So there's definitely got to be some sort of facility there to have an amount of vehicles that can get on. I know they'd be under a commander, but.
So for this reason, the site has 2 vehicular access points, so that whichever way the wind is blowing, there will always be an access open. The scheme is designed with perimeter roads to enable that you can get around the site. There is adequate hard surfacing within the site to be able to drive around and to station trucks. I mean, again, it is envisaged ordinarily when a fire would start, it will be in one battery unit. We're not anticipating a scenario where the entire site is on fire. So the view, and this is something, the reason that the fire service have set out these regulations is to ensure that there is potential to access for emergency vehicles and around the site, and for adequate access for the right number of vehicles. So it meets all of those criteria. So we're satisfied that that should not be an issue. Sorry, I've forgotten now what the other point I was that you were referring to, which I think it was in terms of just the battery technologies. There is a talk and obviously a lot of comparison and understandable concerns about fires that have happened elsewhere. Battery technology, as we keep hearing, is moving on remarkably. The changes are there. So, I mean, I don't know. I suspect probably most of us in the room don't know the details of the sites that have had a fire. What were the circumstances? How were they laid out? Did they follow these necessary precautions? What were the battery ion technologies? So I can understand the tendency to compare and think, well, if there was a fire there, therefore there's a strong likelihood. But I would imagine that anything that is up and running as a battery storage now was designed with much older technology than we are likely to be getting now, because the technologies are moving on. So I think we just need to be cautious about assuming that we're comparing apples with apples, because we aren't necessarily doing so.
Okay. Councillor Kim Bloxham.
Thank you, Chair. I think actually one of my questions has been answered, because I was concerned about the noise mitigation on the wildlife as well, but I think Councillor Hall got ahead of me there. Secondly, I think one of the speakers mentioned earlier about there were no hydrants in place in the locality. Can I just have clarity, please, as to whether there are any hydrants in the locality?
Chair, I don't believe there are. That's why they've proposed the water storage.
Which is the concern about whether it's enough or not. So thank you.
Okay, and coming around for a second bite, Councillor Ian Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of points. First of all, I don't know if everyone's aware, the reason they don't put water on lithium is lithium creates its own oxygen. So it doesn't, you can smother it and it will still burn because it is, and that then contaminates the water. So I think in 2019, when we had the Liverpool fire, the fire officers, it was new technology, didn't know how to deal with it, so they're pumping water on it, causing these problems. The new thing from Wärtsilä, from what I've read, and again, it is their information, but they are a Danish company or a Finnish company, whatever, highly regulated, but they actually create boxes to contain it. And they've set fire to 4 of them to say, can it burn out on its own? Yes, you get atmospheric pollution. I'm not going to deny that with any fire you do. But the idea of what we've just heard, the idea of these containers is that you then spray water on the outside to keep them cool around it so that you don't have the explosion that you can get. And the testing systems on them is supposed to be better. So that was just to try and clear that up. The question I wanted to ask is about the clear up. And I think that's a fair point in 40 years. You know, if you're a business person, you've raped it and you've made your money out of it, etc., and then in 40 years' time, you've got to clear it up and that's expensive. It's like, oh, well, I'll just leave that there and we'll go bust and go away. Is there any way that, again, we can make it a condition, just like we have to when we put in SANGs for the government, and we have to do this, we have to have an endowment or some way of guaranteeing that there is money, if we know the clear up cost at this time is, say, I don't know, £500,000 or £1 million to remove that stuff and deal with it, that some way that we can guarantee that it will be done in 30 or 40 years' time. Question one. Second question is, there is, again, renewal of these batteries is important. So their life expectancy is about 8 to 10 years, and depending on their usage. So is there any way that we are going to be satisfied, or is that going to be part of the battery number 15, the regulation 15, the battery safety scheme, when we finally work out what is the best batteries to put in there, using a minimum of the iron phosphate batteries that we know is good now, the best at the present time. So once we know that, are we going to be able to put something in there so that the fire officer or someone is going to be sure that they are changing them when they are required to be changed? Because again,
that's a way businesses might cut corners in the future. But I just think it's important that people understand that you don't pump water on lithium-ion fires, which they didn't perhaps, you know, the fire officer never had to deal with a lithium-ion battery fire before. In 2019, they had one, and then they started learning about it. Then they make the 23. They're now upgrading that because they've had more of them. And the other one final thing I want to mention, the 2 recent fires were all in the construction process of this, not when it's up and running and done. So it's when it's being constructed. And it was stated that no risk to the public was deemed at that time. So there was no risk to the public when they put the fire out in Basildon, the one in March this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Jenny Brown. No, you're okay, Jenny. Councillor Eileen Ragg, you had another question.
Yeah,
Peter?
many of the statements about the environmental matters, bat foraging and BNG, only apply if there's no fire. Has fire been taken into account when considering these things? That's one question. Got another one. And do you want the other one?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like also to know if one battery fails, catches fire, what are the chances of the 49 others? If there's more than one failure, you know, what would the problem, how would that be dealt with? And also one for the applicant, in the event of a fire, unlikely as it may be, or as we know, with lithium batteries, it can be somewhat of an unknown quantity. What guarantee can they give that the water contamination would not reach the aquifer and contaminate that water, please? And I'd like a straight answer to that one, please. That's the most important thing. That's my sticking point.
Okay, thank you. If you could switch your mic off, Eileen.
Oh, sorry.
I'll let the officers come back. And then if one of the applicants could do, I think the fire officer there said that the water that came off it would be relatively clean because it would only be sprayed on the other battery
Yeah,
containers
Chair, with
to
respect,
keep them cool.
I'm asking for an assurance from the applicant that the aquifer would not be contaminated as right. I want
That's
a
fair
definitive
enough.
answer.
Yeah. Bit of discussion going on here with the officers.
Chair, I'll have a go, starting with Councillor Barlow's questions. In terms of a clean-up or a guarantee, there is a decommissioning condition, which I think is the one you lighted on, with the expectation that there is a decommissioning scheme to be agreed with the local planning authority, and that should be enacted within a certain time frame. I mean, normal enforcement powers apply in terms of enforcing that planning condition. That's enforceable against the landowner at the time. In terms of the renewal of the battery modules themselves, the applicant has stated, and you've picked up on, they do cycle them when they sort of degrade, and as a habit anyway, for safety reasons perhaps, or perhaps they just aren't performing as well as they ought to be. You know, they do degrade in different ways and may not be up to specification over time to do the job that they're designed to do. Whether we could apply a planning condition to insist on a certain frequency of replacement, I'm unsure, if I'm honest, because I think it depends on the technology they use. The battery safety management plan, I believe, would detail some of the matters relating to those issues as well. I think it's hard for us to sort of alight upon, what would be an appropriate phase, I suppose, of operation for a cell unit. Naturally, if there's nothing wrong with the unit, there's no need to replace it. The operator of the site isn't going to want faulty cells putting their development at risk. I would like to think they're not going to want cells that don't perform adequately in terms of their storage capacity. And coming on to, sorry.
If just, so sorry, Mr. M, just adding on to that, I think the condition that we've got for the battery safety management plan, I think within that, once the battery technology, because obviously there's also a potential, if this was to be approved, there's been suggested to have a condition to say that it needs to be this particular technology that they've proposed, unless an alternative technology is previously agreed in writing. So when it comes to agreeing a battery management storage plan, depending on the battery technology, I would anticipate that it would be known what the life expectancy of those units is, and it could be then put in the battery storage management plan that they shall be renewed at whatever that life expectancy is, to ensure that you've got a control to make sure that things are being renewed within the safety, in the realms of best practice. So I think we could control that by specifically adding some reference to that into condition 5.
And sorry, Chair, through you, but is it possible to do an endowment on that sort of thing, like we have to with the Sangs, where we have to put in money up front to guarantee in 30 years' time that they can clean it up?
I think it's slightly different with SANGs, because SANGs is for the long-term monitoring of maintenance of the SANGs. So you need the money because those SANGs will be managed by parties that are no longer connected at all to the housing or the developments that are built in. In this scenario, if for some reason, if that didn't happen and somebody had, whatever, they'd gone bust or etc., then the enforcement would be against the landowner. So if the site had been sold on, then the enforcement would be against the new landowner. So it's so that there are mechanisms for doing that, but it is through the enforcement, and that is how we would seek to deal with most planning conditions, is through the normal breach of condition or enforcement. And breach of condition notice, if you fail to comply with, is subject to prosecution. So, and there is no appeal against a breach of condition notice.
I understand that, thank you very much, but
Yeah.
my point is, obviously this wouldn't be a cheap clean-up at the end of this, and if the company that owned the land where the battery thing went bust, who are you going to sue at that point? Whereas if you have got something guaranteed at the front, no different than the Sangs, it has to be maintained. That one is for maintenance. A normal endowment is for a 25-year, you pay off your mortgage. But with this case, it would then pay for the clear up of the site, regardless of whether someone sold it, whether they're not in business anymore or not. You have the money there, it is guaranteed.
Just a little follow-up, just to say, I suppose the other aspect is that we don't take that approach on other, so for example, solar farms. We put the same condition on, and we don't require people to make that sort of, yes, put some money in a bond or in escrow or a similar. And I think we would need to be able to specify why of all of the sites are we requiring it for this site when we haven't required it on any others. I think that would be the most challenging aspect.
The only reason I would say for this is, obviously with the BESS, it is totally different to a solar panel. The toxicity of it and the potential for the damage that it could cause in the future would be, it would enable you to have a level of certainty to make sure it's gone, because you're basically leaving otherwise a toxic time bomb sat in the countryside. Just again, I'm just making.
Okay, thank you. I'm guessing you're saying we can't insist on that.
I mean, the officer view is I think it would be difficult to identify this because we have approved BESs recently without this, without that requirement. If the, again, you know, it would be dependent, it would require, because it would either need to be as part of a Section 106 or a pre-commencement condition. So either way, it would need agreement with the applicant before we could proceed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Matt Hall.
I think Councillor Ragg wants an answer to a question.
Oh, okay. Councillor Bragg,
Sorry, yes, forgive me, yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
So Councillor Ragg, your first question was around the impact of a fire on wildlife. Has it been assessed?
Have the implications of fire occurring been built into the report? Sorry, I'm using my mic. Yeah, had the effects of fire been considered when commenting on the wildlife?
No, we wouldn't, for any development, ordinarily give that consideration. We'd have to assume normal operation. Obviously, a fire incident will potentially have some effect on the local environment, and that includes the flora and fauna. It just depends what the nature of the incident is, you know, the weather, the wind direction, the season. But
Okay.
yeah.
So-
And then you had some other questions. Sorry. So.
And the other one was about batteries. if
Chances
one-
of failure.
Yeah.
Multiple failure. Well, I said earlier that I can't put a figure on it. It's a point of debate. But I mean, I did look up the fire that's been referenced in Essex, Tilbury, and it was a single module that went up and was allowed to burn, and the fire service used a technique of cooling adjacent modules to stop them catching, and that was that. So read into that what you will. And what guarantee, I think this is a question for the applicant, yeah, well, I'm happy for the applicant.
Okay, is anybody from the, yeah, thank you.
Happy to. Before I answer that question, could I just pick up the restoration question? Because there is a solution in place. That's why I've asked the question.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So we have a restoration bond as part of our contract with the landowner, whose concern is exactly the same as yours, that they don't want to be left with a field full of batteries. So that is in place for the lifetime of the project and to the full amount required to decommission the site. And we can provide, I'm assuming, the evidence of that to the council.
What happens when you go bust?
Well, the bond's still there.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, excuse me, can we not have conversation? We can't hear what you're saying anyway. Well, I certainly can't. So if we could just let the applicant finish answering the other question.
So I can confirm that the way that the site is designed restricts any chance of water leaving the site in the event of a fire. Can you please let me finish? There is an impermeable membrane underneath the site. The impermeable membrane is proven in situations where there's corrosion, like corrosive substances and heat, such as underground tunnels or landfill sites, where there's heat and chemicals are generated. And penstock valves are a proven way of restricting the flow of water. So I confirm the site has been designed to do exactly that.
Okay, thank you.
But you can't give an absolute guarantee that the aquifer would remain uncontaminated. Yeah, you've given, you know, the reasons why it shouldn't be, but you haven't actually said it.
I can guarantee, based on what I've just described, that there won't be any contamination of the aquifer.
So we can sue if that's wrong.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, we can't I mean, it's very hard to give a, it's very hard to give a cast iron guarantee that, you know, nothing will ever happen. I would be like me selling you a car and guaranteeing it will never break down.
Yeah, but you always get one of the awkward squad.
Yes. Okay, Matt, you wanted to come back. Councillor Matt Paul.
It was just one thing that occurred to me after a comment from Councillor Barlow. No, it's not do. All right. If these batteries are changed in 10 years, 15 years, and battery technology changes, is that a material change that would constitute a new application, or would you just be satisfied that replacing a battery with any different type of battery is acceptable from a planning perspective? Thank you.
I think if we agree a certain type of battery through the battery safety management plan, that's then the agreed detail. And if they replace it with a similar battery, or the same specification, that's fine, that's not material. If they want to use something that is different, it might need to be agreed. Yeah, through what? Through variation of
condition, or they will discharge the condition.
It's the mechanism, isn't it?
I think they could come in and just discharge the condition.
Yeah, they would. If we've agreed a certain type of technology through the discharge of the condition relating to the battery safety management plan, and they want to use a different technology, they will need to resubmit to discharge that condition again with the alternative technology. Or they could make an application to vary that planning condition to address that particular point.
Yeah.
But thank you for the answer, and that's the answer that I was hoping for. Bearing in mind this can be in such considerable years' time, is it worthwhile putting some form of informative on the bottom of any decision notice should this be approved? Because in 20 years' time, many of us sat in this room are going to be thinking about completely different things than planning. So, apart from Ian, of course.
I'm sure we could add an informative drawing attention to the requirement to agree an alternative, but the condition, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, Councillor Anne Hall.
Sorry to come back. We've been actually talking about fire with the batteries, but we've got massive substation there, and we've just had a substation in Exeter go up. And what are the consequences of that with the water contamination, etc., and what needs? Because I'm pretty sure they had about 7 tenders in Exeter to deal with that one substation. So therefore, that amount of water going on to this substation, which I would assume is bigger than the one which went up in Exeter. I don't know. But what are the consequences on that? Because of actually having enough water on site and all that sort of thing, because we've just been concentrating on the batteries, but we've also got a very big substation there. Thank you.
Do we have it? I don't know if anybody's going to be able to answer that, because we need somebody from the fire service to deal with that one. But I think we're getting into kind of hypothetical scenarios here.
Yeah, I agree, Chair. The fire service has been consulted on the whole proposal. I know there's been some fires in substations recently, but I think it's too early to conclude why that is, or what we need to learn from that. But until recent times, I don't recall being alarmed by quite so many incidents of substations.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Okay, Councillor Faithful, and then I think we should move into debate after this,
Chair.
Brian.
Just going back to other comments others have made, this fire issue, how long would it take for a battery to generate enough heat to impact another battery, bearing in mind, I'm looking at Google satellite, and this location is about as far away as you can get. It's halfway. Our local head office is Cliff St Mary, which is where, as I understand it, that's where the specialist equipment is. You're halfway between Exeter and Dorchester, and Taunton is, about the same. It's about as far away as you can get round here from anything with any specialist equipment. You've picked probably the worst place, as I can see it, if you want to get close proximity to emergency equipment, unless all you need is an ordinary fire tender from Axminster or somewhere like that. But if you need specialist equipment, this is as far as, and we know what the roads are like, you'd have to go through the Sidmouth Road. So how long would it take for a fire to be established before it starts impacting another battery?
Well, we don't have anybody from the fire service here, Peter, they have indicated that they don't anticipate any issues of that nature. But Wendy, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, the evidence that we've already heard this morning is that Devon and Somerset Fire Service don't raise any objections to the proposal, and that the battery technology that is currently proposed for the site in recent experiments where they've had battery units in similar proximity, where one has been deliberately set alight, the others have not combusted. Therefore, the evidence that we've heard today indicates that the chances of a battery fire spreading from one to another is low. The water is on site, so that I'm no fire expert, but I would assume a normal fire tender that access the site would be able to use the water on site for the cooling purposes for which it's intended. But you're right, the location is what it is. We've consulted the fire service. They haven't raised any objections. That's the basis that we've, as officers, have made this consideration.
Okay, I'm sorry, we can't take any further representations from objectors. No, it's no use talking over me because I'll just keep talking. So we need to go into debate now, because I think we've had all the questions we can possibly have. We've had pretty much all the representations we could possibly have. So, Councillor Barlow, first to the...
Thank you, Chair. Look, this is obviously new technology, contentious, scary if it's going on your thing with what we've heard that happened in 2019 in Liverpool. But as we've also heard, you've got to take into account that things have moved on. We're not talking about lithium batteries as in 2019. We're talking about lithium phosphate ion batteries, which are, whatever anyone says, safer and better. Don't catch fire as much. We've also got the company that's putting them in. If you've gone through the pack and then read what they say, that at the end of the day, they've done tests where they no water, they burn them, and they stick within their use. Look, and you're right, they are burning them, and they let them burn. That's how you deal with these fires. They put them in smaller units than they were in Liverpool. Liverpool, they were 20-foot containers. These are smaller than that. They put them in containers where they are in units that they can control the heat within that thing and contain it. The fire officer, or the ex-fire officer, as you've listened there, they don't spray water on it, so the water doesn't get contaminated. They spray the water on the outside of the units if the units next door are getting too hot to handle. So the other units that wasn't necessary in the tests that they've done, this Finnish company, and it isn't some company that we've never heard of or anything, or from a third world country. This is a proper tested company that comes through. So things have moved on. We need this sort of thing if we are going to get to net zero. It has to be done. The fires in Basildon, etc., are in urban areas. Well, the reason you don't want them in urban areas is because at the end of the day, the plumes of smoke that come off them, as you've heard, within 25 to 30 metres can be toxic. But then it disperses. So you don't put it where there are lots of houses. And unfortunate, as this place is near where you can plug it into the grid, and it's got to be the right size to plug it into the grid, and it's also away from the majority of people. For the visual impact, again, it's surrounded with solar panels. So how can we say that that's going to ruin the visual impact from a distance? Nothing close by can be seen because it is surrounded by trees. I went up there yesterday to have a look. I just think that we can, it's really easy. Let's refuse it, and then let's just let the appeals officer decide it. Why should we make it? I'll tell you why, because it's our job to do this. And I think at the end of the day, if you're going to do this thing, it's not always easy, but sometimes you've got to look at the facts that the water coming off it is not going to be contaminated. The water, or the vast majority, there's then catchment for a huge amount. I do think we should put conditions on it, should we want to do this, of saying that at the end of the day, we want to see the bond that they've given to the landowner, so we know it will be cleared up, and also the type of battery conditions, or the type of batteries that are going to be used with the thing that if they're changing it in the future, and to put in there about the amount of time they're going to be allowed to be used, so they're up to date and not going to cause damage. And when you're ready, Chair, I will be happy to make a proposal for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Councillor Anne Hall.
Thank you, Chair. I am all for green energy, environment, and getting down to net zero. But as a well-known television programme says, it's all down to location, location, location. And to me, this is in the wrong location, because you cannot guarantee that aquifer is going to be 100% safe from any pollution incident. And that is catastrophic for the whole area, in my mind, for humans and also nature. And getting down to net zero is one thing, but we've also got to nurture nature. So therefore, I'm struggling to actually support this application on that point, because I fully agree with battery storage is needed. Domestically, we've got battery storage, and we've got one of these newer batteries, and we help the grid to balance. And I understand that, but it does need to be in the right position as location. And to me, this is in the wrong location. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Faithful.
As nobody else is saying anything, I would agree with that, and there's alternatives to holding energy, like pump storage, hydroelectricity, which is far cleaner than any of this. And I'm not sure why we have to have so much of this, but we're having to have this discussion because of what's presented to us. But I'm just not convinced that I've known people close to a quarry who had their water supply declared contaminated. And it's not just, first you've got the cost, you've got to then get connected to the water supply, and then you've got to pay for that water supply when you've got a private water from a private, it's massive impact on those residents. And I'm not convinced that this will be as wonderfully clean and amazing and whatever as suggested. I can't see how this can be contained as so immaculately as being suggested. So I haven't got a lot of confidence in this. I don't think I can support it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brian Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I think what this comes down to, despite what everybody's saying, and I appreciate that Mr. Barlow seems to be quite keen on it, which is his prerogative, but the bottom line here is that we're going to have to compare profit to the future of the environment, and once this aquifer was to be polluted, that's it. It's finished for life. You can't do anything and treat it. You can't put it right. It's environmental damage in its worst state. So I just, and it's not green energy. You know, it's produced probably by, one would imagine, somewhere like Hinkley Point, which is allegedly green, but with all the pollution from that and the byproduct of the nuclear waste, don't consider that green at all. So you just you're buying it cheap and selling it expensive, which is great for the company. But as Peter pointed out earlier, there's not that many houses around there. So it's going to go into the national grid and be sold. It's not going to benefit the area in general. And it's going to be sold at a very expensive price. So I can't see the advantage. We're often informed by the planning authority that things should enhance the area. That's what we're looking for. Will it enhance the area? Will it do the area any good? And I find it in this instance, no, it won't. And I fail to support it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's not necessarily a planning consideration, Brian, is whether it's good for the local area. And I've got to say, in the report, it is firmly established that battery technology does count as green energy simply because it is enabling renewables to balance out the energy supply. And the fact that something is commercially successful does not necessarily mean that it's not green. You know, we need to get away from the idea that simply because something is commercially viable, it can't possibly be green. Well, exactly.
But that's not
exactly.
what I said. I said it's no advantage to the local people. It's just a commercial entity. I'm well aware of that. You know, but it doesn't stack up in my place. Thank you very much, Chair.
No, I take your point, Brian. You know, if it was a factory, it would be providing local jobs and so on. Okay, Councillor Faithful.
Well, just coming back to your comment, you suggested it will balance out green energy. No, it won't. It's blind to what the energy it's taking in. It takes any energy, regardless of where it's come from. So it's not just about green energy, it's every energy, coal or oil or whatever. So, you know, it's got nothing to do with green, it's about energy general.
Well, that is not government line. And the fact is, at the moment, the times when solar and wind are producing most are the times often when demand is relatively low. And so storage has been accepted as a way of being able to store that electricity. You're absolutely right, Peter. It is utterly blind to where the electricity is coming from, but on balance, that is likely to be coming from renewables and is going to be used at a time when the alternative would be to use fossil fuel powered stations. And there are even times when wind power is actually turned off at the moment because they haven't got the capacity to cope with it. So I can't see any more hands up. So, oh, okay. So our generation mix at the moment is 66% renewables. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So that's just at this moment, is it? Okay. So at the moment, 2/3 of those lights up there are being powered by renewables. Okay, Councillor Ragg.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think if we're all honest around this table, most of us are seriously conflicted by this application. We've had an awful lot of information, a lot of technical expert information, and we are lay people. We're being asked to make this hugely important decision, which will affect the lives of people, all right, they don't live right next door to it, but they live fairly close. Yeah, all right. I'm not into geography at the moment. I'm into really trying to come to a decision, and I'm finding it very difficult. Obviously, there are very strong feelings. The one thing that really does stick with me still is that this is so close to an aquifer, and the risk of contamination, and the fact that I know we're not supposed to compare, with like, but nonetheless that what has made an impact on me is the previous recommendation from this council to approve a similar venture, and that was lost at appeal, and this was due to the potential contamination of the aquifer. And that is one thing that keeps coming back to me time and time again. And for that reason, I think I will have to oppose this application. And because of that, I'm making that proposal, Chair.
Okay. Yes. But he okay. Well, you didn't actually make a proposal, Ian. You did. No. Well, you were the first speaker, so I thought.
Councillor Bragg can elaborate then with the reasons.
Yes. No, we didn't. No.
I'm making a proposal
yes,
to refuse.
No.
I'll second that.
There's nothing
Okay.
to second yet. There's reasons.
So,
The refusal.
So, yeah. Okay.
Potential contamination of the aquifer, and I will go back to the previous application, which was dismissed at appeal. I think we can cite that one.
Yeah, I mean, I've made notes about the appeals site, and that one didn't have a containment basin or an impermeable membrane under it. So I think that was one of the inspector's concerns. But okay, so your concern is potential contamination of the aquifer. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Bragg, if you turn to the agenda on page 71. The subtitle headed Planning Balance.
Yeah.
Now, the planners have set out in quite a lot of detail there why they believe on balance this is acceptable. So I think using that information as a basis for your comments, I think you need to explain why you believe that that's incorrect and that it's not on balance acceptable.
Do you want to put your microphone on, Eileen?
Sorry, I've already said, in response to the planning solicitor, we are lay people. This is highly technical guidance and advice.
You must still come up with planning reasons, though. You are, a very experienced planning committee who know that you must come up with planning reasons, especially yourself as an ex-chair.
I haven't got, unfortunately, because of mobility, I haven't brought my hard copy of the local plan here today. I don't know if my seconder.
Go through them, Eileen, on page 39 and argue against them. But the only, sorry, if you put the microphone on. The only thing is that you're arguing against the experts, as you say, we're not.
Yeah.
Councillor Ragg, you're more than entitled to put forward a motion for refusal, as you're well aware, but you do need to give reasons.
I
and
know,
you
I
need to
need to
give
give
them.
policy
You need to
reasons.
give them in lay terms. You know, if you think that's, for instance, it says here that the site is not very exposed to public views, being set back from the main access. If you disagreed with that, then you could explain that that was one of your reasons. We could then hear from Mrs Ormsby as to whether or not she believes that's a decent reason that's likely to stand up to an appeal. But those are the kind of things that we're looking at from you. We're not looking at you citing policies necessarily. We're just asking you to have a look at those comments and say why you disagree that that's the case, because the planners have set out there, for instance, the site is not very exposed to public views. Well, do you disagree? If you do, explain why. It then says as well that while the change in the character of the site will result in from this development, this will be localised and without detriment to the wider landscape. If you disagree, explain why. That's all we're asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. But was it you? Oh, it wasn't you referred to. It was Councillor Barlow. You referred to page 39.
I'm going to bring in Mrs Ormsby here, Eileen, just
Yeah,
while you
go
have a
on.
minute to think.
Councillor Ragg, what I'm understanding from the comments that you made earlier is that you just have one main concern, that you are proposing this is refused, that you don't consider that it's been demonstrated that the proposed development would not, in the case of fire, result in pollution of aquifers and watercourses within an area where local residents are reliant on the use of aquifers, in which case the development would be contrary to Strategy 39, policies EN 14 and EN 18. Is that the reason that you are putting forward?
Yeah, as I say, if I had my local plan here, I'd be able to go through it, but I haven't. So
and it's that
apologise.
single and
Thank you for
sole
that.
reason that you consider that outweighs the benefits of the development itself.
I think when it comes to safety to residents, yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
that's the reason. I mean, obviously, in due course, I'm quite happy to comment on that, but I think that is a reason that could be moved forward for consideration.
Thank you.
Could we add
Thank you.
in the absence? See, indeed. Okay.
Can I just ask Mrs Ormsby, with regards to that, couldn't we say lack of information as a reason for refusal?
Well, I think what I'm understanding Councillor Ragg to say is that from her perspective, it's not been demonstrated, which is similar to not been evidenced, I would say.
Okay. Okay, so we have a proposal to refuse that's been seconded by Councillor Anne Hall. Do you want to come in, Anne?
That's correct. It's public health and the environment, health and safety, which needs to be looked at as a reason for being refused, because it's not just humans, it could affect the nature in all its guises.
Good impact on the environment. Okay, so we have a proposal there, so we will go to a vote. Damien, do you want to?
Can I
do it? Sorry. Yeah, go on, Wendy.
Yes, so sorry, just before you go to vote on that, there's been obvious comparisons with this site and the appeal at Pound Lane. Obviously very, very similar, not so long ago that appeal was dismissed on this very issue, on the fact that it hadn't been demonstrated that there would not be contamination, and that the inspector concluded that those, whilst he acknowledged that it was a green form of energy and that the landscape harm was minimal, the inspector felt that adverse impact outweighed the benefits of the development. I think that it is important to consider that this this application is significantly different from the Pound Lane in the amount of information that we have available to us. The way that the scheme has been laid out to comply with the requirements of the fire chief's guidance note on this, with the one exception of the spacing of the units themselves, but it is clear in that guidance that if the right technologies are used, that they can be closer together. So the officer view is this development complies with the fire chief's recommendations on how to lay out and design these battery storage units. That as I say, we've got 2 access points where previously we had only 1. We have the necessary safety perimeter, roads and access around the site. Importantly, they have the impermeable membrane designed to catch water.
Sorry, if you interrupt again, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And I may have to clear the public gallery completely. I understand feelings run high on this, but we can't have members of the public arguing with councillors and planning officers.
So as I was saying, there are measures in place to prevent contamination, prevent any contaminated water in the case of a fire from entering into the aquifers and water courses. That's been designed and put forward, and in the opinion of officers and the opinion of the Devon Fire Services, is an acceptable solution. So this is materially different, this scheme, to the scheme at Pound Lane. And it's, I think it's just important to bear that in mind when you're voting on this, and that, as I said, technology has moved on, and the officer view is that there has been sufficient evidence provided to demonstrate within reason that this will be a safe development for its lifetime.
Okay, well, we have a proposal. We can't take any more speakers. We have a proposal. I'll ask for those in favour of refusal as proposed by Councillor Bragg and seconded by Councillor Hall. Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Okay, and those against refusal? And abstentions? Okay, so that application is refused. I think we can have lunch. Just as well we ordered it, and we'll come back with for the Plymtree application after lunch. I don't know if anybody's here for Plymtree, but Greg's is just up the road, or M&S down that way. So we'll come back at 2:15, I think. We'll have about 40 minutes for lunch.